The rain had been falling steadily all day, and by the time I pulled up to the Garrison Towers, my hands were shaking from exhaustion and too much coffee and not enough food. Valentine's Day was always brutal for a florist, but this year had been worse than usual because half my staff had called in sick and I'd been running deliveries solo since 6 in the morning. My phone buzzed for the fifth time in as many minutes, and I didn't need to look at the screen to know it was my landlord, Mr. Chen, calling about the rent I was 3 weeks late paying. The irony of sharing a last name with the man who was threatening to evict me wasn't lost on me, but I was too tired to appreciate it. I grabbed the last arrangement from the back of my van, 24 perfect red roses in a crystal vase that had cost someone a small fortune, and ran through the rain toward the building's entrance. The lobby was all marble and gold fixtures, the kind of place where my beat-up delivery van looked like it didn't belong, but the doorman barely glanced at me as I signed in and headed for the elevators. My phone rang again, and this time I answered it, wedging it between my shoulder and ear while I tried to balance the heavy vase. Mr. Chen's voice was sharp and unsympathetic as he reminded me that he had other tenants interested in my shop space, better tenants who paid on time, and if I didn't have the $1,800 I owed him by the end of the week, he'd have no choice but to start eviction proceedings. I closed my eyes and leaned against the elevator wall as it climbed toward the 7th floor, fighting back the tears that had been threatening all day. My mother had run Bloom and Thorn for 30 years before the cancer took her 2 years ago, and the thought of losing her shop, of failing to keep her dream alive, made my chest tight with panic. The elevator dinged, and I stepped out into a quiet hallway, still half listening to Mr. Chen's threats, and turned right toward what I thought was apartment 7B. I knocked twice, harder than I meant to because I was frustrated and scared and so damn tired, and then I heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open and I looked up from my phone expecting to see elderly Mrs. Patterson, and instead found myself staring at a man who made my breath catch in my throat for reasons I couldn't immediately name. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and sharp cheekbones that could have been carved from marble. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold, gray like smoke or storm clouds, looking at me with an intensity that made me feel pinned in place like a butterfly under glass. He was speaking rapid Italian into his own phone, his voice low and controlled but with an edge to it that sent warning signals racing down my spine, and he was dressed casually in a way that probably cost more than my monthly rent, all fitted black fabric that showed off a lean muscular build. I registered 2 other men standing behind him in the apartment, both in dark suits with the kind of stillness that suggested they were ready to move very quickly if needed, and that's when my brain finally caught up with my eyes, and I realized something was very wrong. Roses. Oh God, I'm so sorry, I stammered, nearly dropping the vase as I pulled my phone away from my ear and ended Mr. Chen's call mid-sentence. Wrong apartment. These are for 7B. The man ended his own phone call without taking his eyes off me, sliding the phone into his pocket with a deliberate movement that somehow felt threatening. "Who sent you?" he asked, and his voice was different now, focused entirely on me, with an accent I couldn't quite place that made the simple question sound like an interrogation. "What?" I said, confusion making me stupid. "No one sent me. I'm just delivering flowers. I own Bloom and Thorn on West Side." He reached out and took the card from where it was tucked among the roses, his fingers brushing against mine for just a second, and that brief contact sent an electric jolt up my arm that I absolutely did not want to analyze. He read the card aloud, his gray eyes never leaving my face. "To my love forever yours. Who are they really for?" "I just told you," I said, trying to inject some firmness into my voice, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. 7B. Mrs. Patterson. Her husband orders them every year. Look, I need to go." But when I tried to step back, he moved forward slightly, not blocking my path exactly, but making it clear that leaving wasn't going to be as simple as I wanted it to be. "Wait," he said, And then his hand caught my wrist, gentle enough that it didn't hurt, but firm enough that I couldn't easily pull away. "You've been to 7B before?" "Yes," I said, very aware of how warm his hand was against my rain-chilled skin. "I deliver to Mrs. Patterson every Valentine's Day, every anniversary, sometimes just because she's a regular customer. Now please let me go." The men behind him had moved closer, I realized, flanking him like bodyguards or soldiers, and one of them had his hand inside his jacket in a way that made me think of guns and danger, and all the crime shows I'd ever watched. The hallway smelled like expensive carpet cleaner, and my roses and something masculine that I thought might be coming from the man still holding my wrist, leather and cedar and maybe whiskey, a scent that was doing strange things to my ability to think clearly. I looked past him into his apartment and saw floor-to-ceiling windows, showing the city lights and the rain, modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, art on the walls that was probably worth more than my entire life. This was not a normal person, I realized with growing unease. Normal people didn't have bodyguards standing in their living rooms at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Normal people didn't open their doors looking like they expected an attack. Normal people didn't care this much about a simple flower delivery. I pulled my wrist from his grip with more force than I'd used before and took a full step backward, clutching the vase against my chest like a shield. "I made a mistake," I said, hearing the tremor in my voice and hating it. "Wrong apartment. I'll just go deliver these to the right one and we can both forget this happened." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie because I was never going to forget the way he was looking at me, like I was a puzzle he needed to solve or a threat he needed to neutralize. "Did anyone approach you about this delivery?" he asked, still blocking most of the doorway with his considerable presence. "Did anyone offer to pay you extra, ask questions about the building, about the 7th floor specifically?" "No," I said, backing up another step. "Nothing like that. It's just a normal delivery. I got distracted by a phone call and knocked on the wrong door, and I'm sorry, but I really need to go now." One of the suited men said something in Italian, and the man in front of me responded in the same language, sharp and commanding, and I didn't need to speak Italian to understand that they were talking about me. My van was still double parked outside with the hazards flashing, and I had exactly 15 minutes to get to my last delivery across town before the restaurant hosting the Valentine's dinner party would start calling to complain, and I absolutely could not afford to lose their business. "Please," I tried again, and maybe something in my voice got through to him because he finally stepped back slightly, though his eyes never stopped cataloging every detail of my appearance. My hair had fallen out of its bun hours ago and was hanging in damp tangles around my face. My jeans and jacket were soaked through from running between the van and various buildings all day, and I probably looked exactly like what I was, an exhausted small business owner who was barely keeping her head above water. "Go," he said finally, but it didn't feel like permission. It felt like a temporary reprieve. "Deliver your roses to 7B, but then we're going to talk." I didn't wait to argue, just turned and practically ran down the hall to the correct apartment, my heart still racing and my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the vase when Mrs. Patterson opened her door with a delighted smile. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, I thought wildly as I accepted her tip and her thanks. She hadn't moved to a nursing home or disappeared, or any of the other explanations that might have made sense of the man in 7A's paranoia. I rushed back to the elevator and jabbed the button repeatedly, praying it would arrive before he came out of his apartment, but I could feel his eyes on me, even though when I glanced back his door was closed. The ride down felt like it took forever, and I burst out of the building into the rain like I was escaping something, though I couldn't have said exactly what. My phone rang again as I climbed into the van, and this time it wasn't Mr. Chen, it was an unknown number, and my finger hovered over the decline button before some instinct I didn't understand made me answer. "Maya Chen," the voice said, and it was him, the man from 7A, and hearing him say my name made goosebumps rise on my arms. We need to talk about the flowers you just delivered, about who really sent them, and about why someone wants me to know that they know exactly where I live. I ended the call without responding and sat in my van with the engine running and the rain drumming on the roof, trying to understand what had just happened. A wrong delivery. That's all it was supposed to be. A simple mistake born of exhaustion and distraction. But the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd touched my wrist, the barely contained violence of the men standing behind him, it all suggested that I'd stumbled into something much more dangerous than a wrong apartment number. My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number, and against my better judgment I looked at it. The message was brief, just an address, the Meridian Hotel on 5th, and below it 3 words that made my blood run cold. Come alone, Maya. I should have called the police, should have blocked the number and driven straight home, should have done anything other than what I did. But my mother had always said I was too curious for my own good, and besides there was something in his voice when he'd said my name, something that suggested this wasn't just about flowers or wrong apartments, but about something bigger that I was already tangled up in whether I liked it or not. I put the van in gear and pulled out into traffic, heading toward 5th Street, and whatever waited for me there, and tried to ignore the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother telling me that some wrong turns end up being exactly right. The Meridian Hotel turned out to be less than 10 blocks from the Garrison Towers, and I made it there in under 5 minutes. Though my hands were shaking so badly on the steering wheel, I probably shouldn't have been driving at all. The valet looked dubiously at my battered van, but took it anyway when I pressed a crumpled $5 bill into his hand, and then I was walking through the lobby with my empty flower box clutched against my chest, like some kind of pathetic shield. Room 412. The second text had said, and I found myself in the elevator again, rising toward another encounter with the gray-eyed stranger who somehow knew my name. When I knocked on the door, it opened immediately, like he'd been waiting right there, and suddenly I was being ushered inside by one of the suited men from before, while the man himself stood by the window looking out at the rain-streaked city. "Come in, Maya," he said without turning around, and I hated that he kept using my name, hated how familiar it sounded in his accented voice, hated that some traitorous part of me liked hearing it. I stayed near the door, every instinct screaming at me to run, but his other guard had positioned himself between me and the exit, and I realized with a sinking feeling that leaving wasn't really an option anymore. "I need to see your order form," he said, finally turning to face me, the complete record of who placed that delivery and how they paid. "This is insane," I said, my voice coming out higher than I wanted. "You text me some mysterious address, drag me to a hotel room, you haven't even told me your name." "Dante Moretti," he said, like that should mean something to me, and when I just stared at him blankly, something that might have been surprise crossed his face. "You really don't know who I am." "Should I?" I asked, genuinely confused now on top of being scared. He studied me for a long moment, and then gestured to one of the leather chairs near the window. "Sit down, Maya. Show me the order form, and then I'll explain why someone used your flower shop to find me." I perched on the edge of the chair and pulled out my tablet with trembling fingers, pulling up the order that had started this whole nightmare. "There," I said, turning the screen toward him. "Placed online 3 days ago at 2:47 p.m., paid with a Visa ending in 4739, delivery requested for February 14th between 8 and 10 p.m. to apartment 7B at the Garrison Towers, 2 dozen red roses, message to read. To my love forever yours. Total charge including delivery was $215. Dante took the tablet from my hands, his fingers brushing mine again, and I noticed that his hands were elegant, long-fingered, with calluses that suggested he did more than just sit behind a desk. He studied the screen with an intensity that made me nervous, his jaw tightening as he read, and then he pulled out his phone and took several pictures of my order form before handing the tablet back. "The credit card," he said, his voice flat and cold. "It belongs to a dead man, died 3 months ago, in what the police ruled a heart attack." "That's not possible," I said, my voice shaking now. "I processed it myself, it went through, the bank approved it." Stolen identity, he said, beginning to pace the room like a caged predator. Someone wanted you to come to that building tonight, to that floor specifically. They used a dead man's credit card, because they knew it couldn't be traced back to them. Why would anyone care about a florist delivering roses? I asked, still not understanding. They don't care about the florist, he said, stopping his pacing to look at me directly. They care about what the florist can see, can report. Tell me, Maya, did anyone approach you about this delivery, offer to pay you extra, ask questions about the building or about apartment 7B? No, I insisted, nothing like that. This is insane. I'm calling the police. His hand shot out and covered my phone before I could dial, his palm warm against the back of my hand. That would be a mistake, he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made me freeze. The police can't protect you from the kind of people who orchestrated this. And you can, I asked, trying to sound brave and failing miserably. His gray eyes locked on mine, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. Yes, he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. One of his men entered then, the one who'd gone to check on apartment 7B, and he spoke to Dante in rapid Italian that I couldn't follow. But I watched Dante's face as he listened and saw his expression darken, saw his hands curl into fists at his sides, and I knew before he translated that the news was bad. 7B is empty, he said, turning back to me. Has been for 2 weeks. Mrs. Patterson moved to a nursing home after a fall. The apartment is being prepared for new tenants, but no one lives there currently. But that's impossible, I said again, feeling like I'd stumbled into some alternate reality where nothing made sense. I've delivered to Mrs. Patterson dozens of times. Her husband always orders roses for Valentine's Day, for their anniversary. He's very particular about the variety. Dante moved to the side table where I'd set the roses earlier, the ones meant for an apartment that didn't have anyone in it anymore. And he pulled the card from among the blooms. To my love forever yours, he read aloud. Not the kind of message you send to an empty apartment. It's the kind of message you send when you want someone to know you're thinking about them, watching them, when you want them to know you can find them whenever you want. I felt cold all over suddenly despite the warmth of the hotel room. You're saying someone used my shop, my delivery service, to send you a message. Not just a message, he said, pulling one of the roses from the arrangement and studying it closely. Confirmation, reconnaissance. Whoever ordered these now knows exactly which apartment I'm in, knows the layout of the building, knows that I answered the door myself at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. His phone buzzed, and when he looked at the screen his jaw clenched, and I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. What I asked, unable to stop myself. He showed me the phone, and I saw a photo of myself from earlier that evening, standing in the hallway outside apartment 7A, with the roses in my arms. The image was grainy like it had been taken from a security camera, but my face was clearly visible. Where did that come from? I whispered. Someone who was watching, he said. Someone who now knows that you delivered flowers to my door, that you saw my face, that you entered my apartment even if only for a moment. I stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. I need to leave. I need to go home. This has nothing to do with me. Sit down, Maya, he said, and though his voice wasn't loud, there was command in it that made my legs obey before my brain could argue. You can't leave yet. Whoever sent those flowers now knows you've seen me, spoken to me. They'll assume I told you things or that you saw things in my apartment. But I didn't. I protested, feeling panic rising in my chest. I don't know anything. I don't even know who you are or why any of this matters. And they don't know that, he said, moving closer until he was standing right in front of my chair, looking down at me with those storm-gray eyes. All they know is that a florist delivered roses to my door and then spent 20 minutes in a hotel room with me. They'll wonder what we talked about, what information you might have, whether you're a threat. I'm not a threat, I said desperately. I'm just trying to keep my mother's flower shop running. I'm 3 weeks behind on rent. I can barely afford to eat most days. I'm nobody. His expression shifted then, something almost like sympathy crossing his features. I know, he said quietly. I know you're not a threat, Maya. I know you're struggling to keep Bloom and Thorn afloat after your mother died. I know your landlord is threatening eviction. I know you work 16-hour days trying to make ends meet. I stared at him in horror. How do you know all that? I never told you my shop name. I never told you about my mother. I make it my business to know everything about people who come into my life unexpectedly, he said. It's how I stay alive. I had someone look into you while you were driving here. You investigated me, I said, my voice rising. You had someone dig into my life, my finances, my family. I needed to know who you were, he said, his tone matter of fact like this was completely reasonable. I needed to know if you were part of this, if you were working with whoever sent those flowers. And now you know I'm not, I said. So I can go. He shook his head, and I felt tears of frustration and fear burning behind my eyes. You can't go because now you're connected to me, whether we like it or not. Whoever is watching will keep watching. They'll look into you just like I did. They'll see a struggling florist with debts and problems, and they'll wonder if they can use you to get to me. Use me, how I whispered. As leverage, he said, his voice going hard. They'll threaten you to make me do what they want, or they'll hurt you to send me a message. That's how these things work, Maya. That's the world I live in. Then get me out of it, I said, anger cutting through the fear. You said this isn't my fault, that I didn't know. So protect me by letting me walk away and forget this ever happened. He moved away toward the window, and I saw him run his hand through his dark hair, a gesture that seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. I wish I could, he said quietly. But they've already seen you, already have your photo. Walking away now would just make you an easier target. The classical music was still playing from somewhere, something sad and slow that matched the rain against the windows, and I noticed details I'd missed before in my panic. The art on the walls was original, expensive. The furniture was leather and wood that probably cost more than my van. The view from the window showed the entire downtown skyline spread out like scattered diamonds. This was not a normal hotel room. This was a suite, the kind of place that cost thousands of dollars a night. And Dante Moretti stood in it like he belonged there, like luxury and power were as natural to him as breathing. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Exhausted and scared, and so far out of my depth, I couldn't see the surface anymore. I want you to trust me, he said, turning from the window to face me. I want you to let me protect you until I can find out who's behind this and neutralize the threat. I want you to understand that despite how we met, despite what you've stumbled into, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Why, I asked, genuine confusion in my voice. Why would you protect me? You don't know me. I'm just a florist who knocked on the wrong door. Because you're innocent, he said, and there was something fierce in his voice now. Because you were used without your knowledge or consent. Because whoever did this put a target on your back to get to me, and I don't let innocent people suffer for my enemies' games. One of his guards said something in Italian, and Dante responded sharply, some kind of argument I couldn't follow, but I caught my name in the rapid exchange, and the guard's dubious expression when he looked at me. What I asked when they finished. My men think I'm being too cautious, he said, that you're not important enough for our enemies to bother with. And what do you think I asked? I think he said, moving back to stand in front of me, his gray eyes intense and unwavering, that anyone who enters my world even accidentally becomes important by default. I think you deserve protection, and I think I want to give it to you. There was something in the way he said that last part, something that made heat curl low in my stomach despite my fear, and I realized with a start that he was looking at me not like a problem to be solved, but like a woman he was seeing for the first time. The moment stretched between us, heavy with things I didn't understand, and then his phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. He looked at the screen, and his expression went cold and hard. What is it? I asked. They're moving faster than I expected, he said, pulling out his laptop and typing rapidly. They've already started looking into you, hacked your shop's website, pulled your business records. They know where you live, Maya. My apartment, I said, panic flooding back. Above the shop, I need to go there. I have things, my mother's jewelry, her recipe books. You can't go back there, he said firmly. It's not safe. I'm sending men to collect your essentials, but you can't be there. Then where am I supposed to go? I asked, hearing my voice crack. Here, he said. With you. In a hotel. Indefinitely. That's insane. He moved to his computer and pulled up what looked like security footage from various cameras around the city. See that car, he said, pointing to a black sedan parked across from my flower shop? That's been there for 2 hours. See those two men in the coffee shop next door? They've been nursing the same cup since 7 p.m. They're watching your place, Maya, waiting for you to come home. I stared at the screens, feeling my reality crumble around me. This can't be happening, I whispered. But it is, he said, his voice gentler now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you knocked on my door. I'm sorry you got pulled into this. But now that you're here, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe. Even if I don't want your protection, I asked. Even then, he said. But I think you do want it, because you're smart enough to be scared and brave enough to admit it. I looked at him standing there in his expensive clothes, with his dangerous eyes and his unexpected concern. And I thought about my empty apartment, and the men watching it, and the photo someone had taken of me. I thought about my mother, who had always told me to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that Dante Moretti was dangerous, but also that he was telling the truth. Fine, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. But I have conditions. I need to keep running my shop. I have orders to fill, bills to pay. Done, he said immediately. My men will handle deliveries. You can work from here coordinating everything remotely. And when this is over, I asked. When you catch whoever is behind this, I get to go back to my normal life, like none of this ever happened. When this is over, he said, something unreadable in his expression. You'll be free to do whatever you want. Go wherever you want. I'll make sure of it. The way he said it made me think he didn't quite believe it himself, but I was too tired and scared to push. Okay, I said. Okay, I'll stay. I'll let you protect me, but I want to know everything. Who you are, who's after you, why any of this is happening. He nodded slowly. I'll tell you everything, he said, but not tonight. Tonight you need to rest. You look like you haven't slept in days. I haven't, I admitted. Valentine's Day is brutal for florists. Then sleep, he said, gesturing toward a door I hadn't noticed. The bedroom is through there. It's secure. No one can get in without going through me and my men first. And where will you be? I asked, suddenly nervous about being alone in a strange place. Right here, he said, settling into the chair by the window. I don't sleep much anyway. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand more answers, but exhaustion was pulling at me like a physical weight, and I found myself moving toward the bedroom door. Maya, he called just as I reached it, and I turned back to look at him. I meant what I said. You're safe now. I promise you that. I nodded and slipped into the bedroom, closing the door behind me and leaning against it as I tried to process everything that had happened. Just this morning, my biggest problem had been making rent. Now I was hiding in a luxury hotel under the protection of a man who commanded respect with just his voice and had enemies who used flower deliveries as weapons. I looked around the bedroom and saw it was as expensive as everything else, all soft grays and whites, with a bed that looked like a cloud, and through the window I could see the rain still falling over the city. Somewhere out there were people looking for me, people who saw me as a tool or a threat, and the only thing standing between them and me was a stranger with storm-gray eyes who'd promised to keep me safe. I should have been terrified, should have been planning my escape, but instead, I found myself thinking about the way he'd said my name, the way his hand had felt against my wrist, the intensity in his eyes when he'd promised to protect me. I climbed into the two soft beds still fully dressed and pulled the covers up to my chin, listening to the rain and the classical music still playing faintly from the other room, and trying to convince myself that I hadn't just made the biggest mistake of my life by trusting Dante Moretti. But as I drifted off to sleep, exhausted and overwhelmed, the last thing I thought about was the way he'd looked at me, not like a problem or a pawn, but like someone who mattered. And somewhere in the darkness of that hotel room, I decided that maybe, just maybe, I could trust him after all. I woke to the sound of low voices speaking Italian, and for a confused moment I couldn't remember where I was, until the events of the previous night came rushing back in a nauseating wave. The bedroom was dark except for a thin line of light under the door, and when I checked my phone, I saw it was just after 3 in the morning. I'd slept for maybe 4 hours, restless dreams full of roses and gray eyes and men watching from shadows, and now I was wide awake with my heart pounding and the certainty that I wouldn't be falling back asleep anytime soon. I got up and moved quietly to the door, pressing my ear against it to listen, and heard Dante's voice sharp with frustration, talking to someone about security protocols and surveillance footage, and a name I didn't recognize. After a few minutes, the other voice left, and I heard footsteps moving around the suite, the clink of glass against glass, and then silence. I should have stayed in the bedroom, should have left him alone with whatever he was dealing with, but something made me open the door and step out into the main room. Dante was standing by the window again looking out at the city, but he turned immediately when he heard me, his expression alert and guarded, until he saw it was just me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, and his voice was rougher than before, tired in a way that made him seem more human. "No," I admitted, moving further into the room. "Too much has happened. My brain won't shut off." He nodded like he understood and gestured toward the chair I'd sat in earlier. "I have tea if you want it, or there's wine in the bar. Help yourself to whatever you need." "Tea would be good," I said, surprised by the offer, and watched as he moved to a small kitchen area I hadn't noticed before and pulled out a kettle. It was such a normal domestic gesture, so at odds with everything else about him, that I found myself relaxing slightly. The suite looked different at night, with the city lights providing most of the illumination, softer somehow, less intimidating. I noticed things I'd missed before in my panic: books stacked on a side table, a laptop open on the desk showing what looked like financial spreadsheets, a leather jacket draped over a chair. These were the details of a life, not just a temporary hotel room, and I realized he must stay here often, maybe even live here. While the water heated, I wandered over to the bookshelf along one wall, curious despite myself about what kind of books a man like Dante Moretti would read. There were classics in multiple languages, poetry, history, philosophy, all well-worn, like they'd been read multiple times. But it was the photograph tucked between 2 volumes that caught my attention, partially hidden like someone had meant to keep it private, but couldn't quite bring themselves to put it away completely. I pulled it out carefully and found myself looking at a much younger Dante, maybe 19 or 20, with his arm around an older couple who had to be his parents. His father had the same sharp cheekbones and intense eyes. His mother had dark hair and a warm smile that transformed her entire face. But it was the teenage girl standing in front of Dante that made my breath catch. She couldn't have been more than 16, laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back in pure joy, and on her head was a crown of roses, carefully woven together, the blooms full and perfect, and unmistakably Juliet Garden roses even in the photograph. "Your tea," the voice came from right behind me, and I jumped, nearly dropping the frame. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, setting it back on the shelf. "I shouldn't have been looking through your things." Dante was standing close enough that I could smell whiskey on his breath mixed with that cedar and leather scent I was starting to associate with him. He looked at the photograph for a long moment, his expression completely shuttered, and then he handed me a delicate china cup filled with tea that smelled like bergamot and honey. "It's old," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Not important." But I'd already seen the way his hands had tightened on his own glass when he'd looked at the photo, had seen something almost like pain flash across his face before he'd hidden it. "Those are Juliet Garden roses," I said, pointing at the flower crown. In her hair, I recognized the variety. He went very still. You can tell that from a photograph. I grew up in that shop, I said, warming my hands on the teacup. My mother taught me every variety, every species. She could identify a rose from across a room just by the way the petals curved. The Juliet rose took 15 years to cultivate, cost millions to develop. People who choose them aren't just buying flowers, they're making a statement. What kind of statement, he asked, and his voice had gone quiet, almost dangerous. Love, perfection, obsession, I said, meeting his eyes. All three. They're the kind of roses you give when you want someone to know they're the most important thing in your world, or when you want them to know you'll never let them go. He was silent for so long, I thought he wasn't going to respond. Just keep standing there with that shuttered expression and his white-knuckled grip on his glass. Then he moved past me to the chair by the window and sat down heavily, suddenly looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. Sit down, Maya, he said, and it wasn't a command this time, it was almost a request. Please. I settled into the chair across from him, the same configuration as earlier, but something had shifted. The distance between us felt smaller, more intimate. He took a long drink of his whiskey and then set the glass down with careful precision. That girl in the photograph, he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. That was my sister Lucia. She died 5 years ago on Valentine's Day. She was 19 years old and she was murdered because someone decided if they couldn't have her, no one would. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. I'm so sorry, I whispered. And I meant it. I knew what it was like to lose someone you loved, to have them stolen away and leave a hole in your life that never quite closed. Who would send her those roses, I asked gently. Who would put Juliet roses in her hair? Dante leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands like they held answers he hadn't found yet. She made them herself, he said, a small smile ghosting across his face. She loved flowers, spent hours in our mother's garden learning the names and varieties. She said flowers were the only honest things in our world because they didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were. She sounds wonderful, I said softly. She was, he said, his voice breaking slightly on the words. She was smart and kind and so full of life. She wanted to study botany, maybe open her own flower shop someday. She had all these plans, all these dreams. He stopped and I saw his hands were shaking, just slightly, trembling with suppressed emotion. What happened, I asked, though part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to hear the story that had put that haunted look in his eyes. Dante stood and moved to the window, his back to me, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled again, but I could hear the effort it cost him. There was a man, he said, older, powerful, connected to a rival organization. He saw Lucia at a charity event and became obsessed with her, started sending her gifts, flowers, always roses, always Juliet roses because he'd asked around and found out they were her favorites. She rejected him, told him she wasn't interested, told him to leave her alone. He didn't take it well. I felt cold all over, already knowing where this was going, but unable to stop listening. He kept pursuing her, I guessed. For months, Dante said, turning to face me, and I saw raw pain in his eyes now, all pretense of control gone. Letters, gifts, he'd show up places she went, always watching, always there. She was scared. We all were. My father tried to handle it through diplomatic channels, tried to negotiate with the man's organization, but he was untouchable, protected. So what happened, I asked, though my voice was barely a whisper. Valentine's Day, 5 years ago, Dante said, sitting back down across from me. Lucia came home from class to find 24 Juliet roses on our doorstep. No card, just the roses. She brought them inside because she didn't want to be rude, didn't want to make things worse. 3 hours later, men broke into our home. My parents were at a business dinner. I was out. Lucia was alone. He stopped, And I saw him swallow hard, saw him close his eyes against memories I couldn't imagine. They made it look like a robbery gone wrong, he continued, his voice flat now, emotionless in the way of someone reciting facts they'd gone over 1,000 times. Took some jewelry, broke some things. But the roses were arranged around her body when I found her. A crown of them on her head, just like in that photograph, just like she used to make for herself in the garden. Oh God, I breathed, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. Dante, I'm so sorry. The police never found who did it, he said, and now there was ice in his voice, hard and cold and deadly. Ruled it a random attack, closed the case within 6 months. But I knew, I've always known who was responsible, who ordered it, who sent those roses as a calling card. And you've been hunting him ever since I said, understanding dawning. That's what tonight was about. Whoever sent those roses to your door, you think it's the same person. I know it's the same person, he said, pulling out his phone and showing me a photo. This came to my father's house 3 days ago, the same day your flower order was placed online. I looked at the screen and saw an image of roses, Juliet roses, arranged in a heart shape on a doorstep, and underneath them, a card that read, 5 years, and I still think of her every day. My hands were shaking when I handed the phone back. He's taunting you, I said, reminding you he got away with it. He thinks he's untouchable, Dante said, and there was something terrifying in his voice now, something that reminded me exactly what kind of man I was sitting across from. He thinks because he's protected by his organization, because he has power and money and connections, that he can do whatever he wants, that he can murder an innocent girl and face no consequences, that he can send me reminders of what he took from me, and I'll do nothing about it. But you're going to do something, I said. It wasn't a question. I've been planning it for 5 years, he said, his gray eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Gathering evidence, building a case, finding witnesses. I can't just kill him because then I'm no better than he is. I need to destroy him completely, his reputation, his business, his freedom. I need everyone to know what he did. And the roses tonight, I said, connecting the pieces. If they came from him, if he's using the same signature. Then he's making a mistake, Dante finished. Because this time I have someone who can identify where the roses came from, who might be able to trace them back to their source. Someone with expertise I didn't have 5 years ago. He was looking at me in a new way now. Not like a complication or even a person to be protected, but like a resource, an asset, maybe even an ally. You want my help? I said slowly. You want me to use what I know about flowers to track down your sister's killer? I want, Dante said, leaning forward until we were almost close enough to touch, to give you a choice. You can stay here under my protection until this is over and then go back to your life. Or you can help me find the person who took my sister from me, and in return, I'll make sure your shop never has to worry about money again. I'll clear your debts, set you up with contracts that will keep you stable for years. Why, I asked. Why offer me that? You could just make me help you. You have all the power here. He reached out then, and his fingers brushed against my hand where it rested on my knee, the touch gentle, almost tentative. Because you understand, he said quietly. I can see it in your eyes. When you talk about your mother, you know what it's like to lose someone who meant everything, to have them taken away and leave you behind trying to figure out how to keep living. I do, I admitted, and my voice was thick with tears I was trying not to shed. I lost my mother 2 years ago, and some days I still reach for the phone to call her, still walk into the shop expecting to see her arranging flowers, still can't believe she's really gone. Then you understand why I can't let this go, Dante said. And something passed between us in that moment, a recognition of shared pain, shared loss, a bond forged in grief. Why I won't rest until the man who killed my sister faces justice for what he did. I looked at him sitting there in the soft light from the city, This dangerous man with his expensive clothes and his bodyguards and his world of violence, and I saw past all of that to the broken 19-year-old who'd come home to find his sister murdered, to the son who'd failed to protect the person he loved most. I thought about my mother, who'd always told me to help people when I could, to use my gifts to make a difference. And I thought about Lucia, who'd loved flowers and had dreams and had been killed by a monster who'd never faced consequences. "I'll help you," I said, making the decision even as fear twisted in my gut. "I'll use everything I know about roses to track down where tonight's delivery came from, where the ones sent to your father's house came from. I'll help you find whoever did this." Dante's expression, transformed, relief, and something that looked almost like hope flickering across his features. "You don't have to," he said. "I know you're scared. I know this isn't your world." "I am scared," I admitted. "Terrified, actually. But my mother always said that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite it, and helping you find your sister's killer. That feels like the right thing." He stood and moved to a desk across the room, pulling out a folder thick with papers and photographs. "These are all the attacks I've connected to him over the past 5 years," he said, laying them out on the coffee table between us. Everyone involved Juliet Roses. Everyone was on a significant date: Valentine's Day, anniversaries, birthdays. He uses them as signatures, as calling cards, as ways to claim responsibility without actually admitting anything. I moved to sit beside him on the floor, spreading out the photographs and documents, and felt my professional brain kick in despite my exhaustion. "These are all Juliet Roses," I said, examining the images closely. "Same variety, probably same grower. Look at the petal structure, the color variation. These all came from a very specific source." "Can you trace them?" he asked, and I heard hope in his voice now. "Can you find out where he's getting them?" "Maybe," I said, pulling out my phone and opening my notes app where I kept supplier information. "Juliet Roses are rare, expensive. There are only a handful of growers in the country who specialize in them. If I can get access to shipping records, customer lists, I might be able to narrow down who's been ordering them in these quantities." "I have people who can get that information," Dante said. "Just tell me what you need." "I need to see the roses from tonight," I said. "The actual flowers, not just photos. I need to examine them closely, look for markers that might tell me which grower they came from, which greenhouse, possibly even which growing cycle." He was already pulling out his phone, typing rapid instructions in Italian, and within minutes one of his men appeared carrying the vase of roses I'd delivered hours ago. I took one of the blooms and examined it carefully, noting the size of the petals, the depth of color, the structure of the stem. "These are fresh," I said. "Cut within the last 48 hours, greenhouse grown, not garden grown, based on the stem thickness. And see this slight variation in color at the petal edges. That's characteristic of a specific growing technique used by only 3 or 4 facilities in North America." "Which ones?" Dante asked, watching me work with an intensity that made me hyper-aware of how close he was sitting. "Rosewood Estates in Connecticut," I said, still examining the rose. "Thornhill Gardens in Oregon, possibly Bellafiore in California, though their Juliets tend to be deeper red. And there's a private grower in upstate New York, but they only sell to exclusive clients." "Can we check all of them?" he asked. "We can," I said, "but it'll take time, access to records, maybe even site visits. I can't just call them up and ask if they've been selling to murderers." Dante's hand covered mine, where I was still holding the rose, and I looked up to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping, for not running away, for understanding why this matters so much." "I understand loss," I said simply. "I understand the need to make it mean something, to find answers, to get justice. My mother died slowly, cancer, so I got to say goodbye. But it doesn't make the missing her any easier, doesn't make the world feel any less empty without her." His fingers tightened on mine. She'd be proud of you, he said. Running her shop, keeping her dream alive, helping a stranger find answers about his sister. I hope so, I said, and felt tears slip down my cheeks before I could stop them. I hope she'd understand why I'm doing this, why I'm trusting you when every logical part of my brain is screaming that I shouldn't. Maya, he said, and his other hand came up to brush the tears from my face, a gesture so gentle it made my breath catch. I promise you, I will keep you safe. I will protect you from whoever sent those roses. And when this is over, when we find the person responsible, you'll go back to your life exactly as you want it. You have my word. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this would all work out, that I could help him find his sister's killer and then return to my normal, quiet life. But sitting there on the floor of a luxury hotel suite at 3 in the morning, examining roses that had been used as weapons, planning to hunt down a murderer with a man who commanded fear with just his presence, I knew that nothing would ever be normal again. The city stretched out beyond the windows, millions of lights marking millions of lives. And somewhere out there was the person who'd killed Lucia Moretti, who'd sent roses as threats, who thought they were untouchable. But they didn't know about me, didn't know that a struggling florist with her mother's expertise and a need to make loss mean something was about to help tear down their carefully constructed facade. I looked at Dante and saw him watching me with those storm-gray eyes and felt something shift between us, a partnership forming, an understanding, maybe even the first threads of something deeper that I wasn't ready to name. "We'll find them," I said, and heard the determination in my own voice. "Whoever killed your sister, whoever sent those roses tonight, we'll find them and we'll make sure they face justice." Dante's smile was fierce and full of a dark promise. "Yes," he said, "we will." The sharp knock on the door came just after 4 in the morning, and I watched Dante's entire body shift into alert readiness as he moved to answer it. A man entered without waiting for permission, younger than Dante by maybe 5 years, with dark hair pulled back in a small bun, and eyes that swept the room cataloging everything, including me, with practiced efficiency. He spoke to Dante in rapid Italian, pulling out a tablet and showing him something that made Dante's jaw tighten in a way I was learning meant bad news. "Maya," he said, gesturing me over. "This is Luca, my second in command. He has information you need to see." Luca nodded at me with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The florist," he said in accented English. "Dante has told me about you, about how you're going to help us find the bastard who killed Lucia." "I'm going to try," I said, moving closer despite my nervousness. "What did you find?" Luca swiped through images on his tablet and then turned it to face me. "This is surveillance footage from your flower shop," he said. "From the past 3 days. See this man here?" I leaned in to look at the grainy video showing a man in a dark jacket standing across the street from Bloom and Thorn, just watching, not moving, not doing anything except staring at my shop's windows. "He was there for 6 hours on Monday," Luca continued, swiping to show another angle. "4 hours on Tuesday, 7 hours yesterday, always watching, always waiting." "I don't recognize him," I said, feeling cold spread through my chest. "Who is he?" Luca looked at Dante, who nodded slightly. "His name is Viktor Kozlov," he said, pulling up a clearer photo. "He's an enforcer for the Volkov family, Russian organized crime. They're the organization we believe was responsible for Lucia's death." The photo showed a man in his 40s with cold blue eyes and a scar running along his jaw. He looked exactly like what he was: dangerous, professional, someone who hurt people for a living. "And he's been watching my shop," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I wanted. "Why would he be watching me?" "Because Dante said," his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "someone told him to, someone connected you to me the moment you delivered those roses, and now they're using you to track my movements, to gather information, to see if I care enough about a random florist to protect her." "Do you?" I asked before I could stop myself, then immediately wanted to take it back because I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dante's gray eyes met mine and held. Yes, he said simply. I do. Luca made a sound that might have been a cough covering a laugh, and when I looked at him, he was studying his tablet with very focused interest. There's more, he said, swiping to show footage from outside the Garrison Towers. Victor was here tonight, arrived 10 minutes before Maya's delivery, left 5 minutes after she did. He was watching the building, watching her. They know where I live, I said, stating the obvious because my brain seemed to have stopped processing complex thoughts. They know where I work, where I live. They've been following me for days and I had no idea. Your apartment above the shop is compromised, Dante said. Your business location is compromised. You can't go back there, not until we neutralize this threat. I stared at him in disbelief. I can't just disappear, I said, hearing my voice rise with panic. I have orders to fill, deliveries scheduled, a business to run. I'm already behind on rent. If I just vanish, I'll lose everything. Then you'll lose it from a safe location, Dante said, his tone brooking no argument. Because if you go back there, Victor will be waiting, and men like him don't ask polite questions. They hurt people until they get the answers they want. I felt tears of frustration burning behind my eyes. This isn't fair, I said. None of this is fair. I delivered flowers to the wrong apartment, and now my entire life is falling apart, Maya Dante said, and his voice was gentler now. I know this isn't fair. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But fair doesn't matter when your life is in danger. What matters is keeping you alive and finding the person who's using you as a pawn. So what, I asked, wrapping my arms around myself. I just give up everything I've worked for, let my mother's shop die because some Russian mobster is watching me. No, Luca said, looking up from his tablet with a slight smile. You let us handle the shop, we make your deliveries, we keep the business running, you continue to do the creative work, the arrangements, the orders, just from a location Victor can't access. And where would that be, I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Dante has a safe house, Luca said. Penthouse across the city, completely secure, top floor, private elevator, security that would make Fort Knox jealous. You'd be comfortable there. Comfortable, I repeated. I'd be a prisoner. You'd be protected, Dante corrected. There's a difference. I wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to insist that I could take care of myself and go back to my normal life, but the image of Viktor Kozlov standing outside my shop for hours, watching, waiting, made the words die in my throat. Fine, I said finally. I'll stay in your safe house, but I have conditions. Dante raised an eyebrow, and I saw what might have been amusement flicker across his face. You're negotiating with me, he said. I'm establishing boundaries, I corrected, using his own distinction. If I'm going to help you, if I'm going to put my life on hold, then I need certain things guaranteed. Name them, he said, and he sounded almost intrigued. I continue my work, I said, ticking off points on my fingers. All my orders get filled, deliveries made on time, customers kept happy. I'm not losing my business because of this. Second, I'm not a prisoner. I can come and go as I please within reason. I won't be locked in some tower. Third, I said, taking a breath and meeting his eyes. You investigated me. You know about my debts. If you want my help with the roses, if you want me to use my expertise to track down your sister's killer, then I want my debt cleared. All of it. That's my price. Luca made another sound, this one definitely a suppressed laugh, and when Dante shot him a look, he held up his hands in surrender. She's got spirit, boss, he said in English. I like her. Dante turned back to me, and I saw something that looked almost like respect in his eyes. Your shop is failing, he said bluntly. 18,000 in debt, 3 months behind on rent, suppliers threatening to cut you off. I felt heat rush to my face. You investigated me, I said, anger cutting through my fear. You had someone dig through my finances, my business records. I investigate everyone who enters my life unexpectedly, he said without apology. It's how I stay alive, how I protect the people around me. I needed to know who you were, what your vulnerabilities were, whether you could be trusted. And what did you decide? I asked. Can I be trusted? Yes, he said simply. You're exactly what you appear to be. A hardworking woman trying to keep her mother's dream alive, struggling but honest. No connections to any organization, no red flags, just bad luck and good intentions. So you know everything about me, I said. And I know nothing about you except that you're dangerous and people are afraid of you, and your sister was murdered. That will change, Dante said. You'll learn more about me, about my world, probably more than you want to know. But right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe. Fine, I said again. You want my help with the roses? I want my debt cleared. That's my price. Take it or leave it. Dante's smile was slight but genuine, transforming his face in a way that made my breath catch. Done, he said. Just like that, I asked, surprised by how quickly he'd agreed. Just like that, he said. Your knowledge is worth far more than 18,000 to me. Consider it an advance payment for services rendered. Luca was openly grinning now. I've never seen anyone negotiate with you like that, boss, he said. It's refreshing. Dante ignored him, his attention still focused on me. Anything else, he asked, and after I said, needing to know. When you find whoever you're looking for, when this is over, what happens to me then? Then you go back to your life, he said, and something flickered in his eyes that I couldn't read. Free and clear, debt paid, business stable, you'll never hear from me again. He paused, and the air between us felt suddenly charged. Unless you want to. The words hung there, full of implications I wasn't ready to examine, and I found myself looking away first, breaking the intensity of his gaze. I need to pack, I said. If I'm going to your safe house, I need things from my apartment. Clothes, personal items, my mother's garden journal. Too dangerous, Dante said immediately. We'll buy you whatever you need. No, I said firmly. I'm not leaving my mother's journal behind. It has 30 years of her notes, supplier information, growing techniques. It's irreplaceable, and I need it if I'm going to help you trace those roses. Dante and Luca exchanged a look, and I saw them having an entire conversation without words. Fine, Dante said. But I'm coming with you. We go in fast. You grab what you need. We leave. Immediately. No lingering. No sentiment. Deal, I said, and tried not to think about how strange it was that I was making deals with a man who probably had people killed for a living. The drive to my shop took 20 minutes through empty pre-dawn streets, and I spent the entire time hyper-aware of Dante sitting beside me in the back of a black SUV that smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Luca drove while another man I hadn't been introduced to rode in the passenger seat, both of them constantly scanning the streets, their tension making my own anxiety spike higher. Your mother ran the shop for 30 years, Dante said, breaking the silence. How did you end up taking it over? She got sick, I said, staring out the window at the passing city. Cancer. By the time they found it, it was already stage 4. She had maybe 6 months. She spent those months teaching me everything she knew. Every supplier, every technique, every secret about flowers she'd learned in 3 decades. I'm sorry, Dante said quietly. Losing a parent is never easy. You lost both of yours, I said, remembering the photograph. In the fire when you were 19, Luca mentioned it. He glanced at Luca in the rearview mirror with an expression that promised a later conversation, but when he spoke, his voice was calm. Yes, he said. Car bomb. They were leaving a restaurant. I was supposed to be with them, but I'd stayed home sick. Lucia was at a friend's house. We both survived because of luck and timing. And now you run their organization, I said. Their business, their empire, whatever you want to call it. Someone had to, Dante said. And I was the oldest, the heir. I didn't have much choice. We always have choices, I said, echoing something my mother used to tell me. We don't always like the options, but we choose anyway. He looked at me with those storm-gray eyes, and something passed between us. Understanding maybe, or recognition, that we were both living lives we hadn't quite planned for. The shop looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Bloom and Thorn read the sign in my mother's careful script, and seeing it made my chest tight with grief and love and determination not to let her legacy die. 2 minutes, Dante said as the SUV pulled into the alley behind the shop. You get what you need and we leave. Luca and Marco will secure the perimeter. I'll be with you the entire time. I nodded and climbed out of the car, pulling out my keys with shaking hands. The back door opened into the workroom where I did all my arrangements, and even in the darkness I could smell the flowers, roses and lilies and freesias, the scent of my childhood, of my mother, of everything I was fighting to keep. The lights, Dante said quietly. Don't turn them on, use this, and he handed me a small flashlight. I moved through the familiar space, touching things as I went. The work table where my mother had taught me to wire bouquets, the cooler where we kept the fresh stock, the ancient radio that only played static but that she'd refused to replace. Dante followed silently, a presence at my back that should have felt threatening but instead felt oddly protective. My apartment was up a narrow staircase, just 3 small rooms above the shop, but it was home. I grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing in clothes, not bothering to fold, just trying to get enough for a few days. Dante stood in the doorway, his large frame seeming to fill the small space, and I was acutely aware of him watching me move through my bedroom, this dangerous man in my most private space. The journal, I said, moving to my mother's old desk. It's in here somewhere. She always kept it. I pulled open drawers, searching, and then Dante was beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, and he pointed to a leather-bound book tucked in the back of the bottom drawer. That one, he asked. I pulled it out and felt tears prick my eyes, because it was worn and stained and full of my mother's handwriting, all her secrets, all her knowledge. Yes, I said, clutching it to my chest. This is it, Maya, Dante said, and his voice had changed, urgent, tense. We need to go now. What I asked, but then I heard it too. Footsteps downstairs in the shop, quiet, trying to be stealthy. Victor, Push whispered. Dante's hand went to the gun I hadn't realized he was carrying. Probably, he said. Out the window. Fire escape now. But there isn't. I started to say, except there was. A rusty fire escape I'd never used, never even thought about, and Dante was already opening the window, helping me through with hands that were gentle despite the urgency. Luca's voice came through an earpiece Dante was wearing, rapid Italian that I couldn't follow, but that made Dante swear under his breath. They're in the shop, he said, climbing through the window behind me. 2 of them, armed. We need to move. The fire escape was slick with rain, and I nearly slipped twice, but Dante's hand was on my back, steadying me, guiding me down. We reached the alley just as the SUV screeched around the corner, Luca at the wheel, and then we were diving into the back seat and the vehicle was accelerating before the door was even closed. Gunfire erupted behind us, the sharp crack of bullets hitting metal, and I screamed despite myself, ducking down as Dante covered me with his body. Drive, Dante shouted at Luca, who was already weaving through the narrow alley at speeds that seemed impossible. More gunfire, the back window shattering, safety glass raining down on us. And then we were out of the alley and onto a main street, and the shooting stopped. Everyone okay? Luca called back. Maya, Dante asked, his face inches from mine, his body still shielding me. Are you hurt? No, I said, though I was shaking so hard I could barely form words. I'm okay, I'm not hurt. Dante stayed where he was for another moment, his eyes scanning me for injuries, and then he slowly sat up, keeping one hand on my shoulder. That was too close, he said to Luca. How did they know we were there? They've been watching the shop, Luca said grimly, Probably had alerts set up for any access. We tripped their system the moment Maya opened the door. I looked down at my duffel bag and my mother's journal, both clutched in my arms, and realized I was crying, tears streaming down my face that I couldn't seem to stop. I could have died, I said, the reality of it hitting me all at once. They were shooting at us. I could have died in my mother's shop. But you didn't, Dante said, and his hand was on my face now, gentle, forcing me to look at him. You didn't die because I was there, because Luca was ready, because we protect what's ours. I'm not yours, I said automatically, but the words felt hollow. He smiled slightly, sadly. Not yet, he said so quietly I almost didn't hear it. But you will be. The safe house was everything Luca had promised. A penthouse on the top floor of a modern building with views of the entire city, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like art, a kitchen that probably cost more than my entire shop. But it felt empty, sterile, like a beautiful cage. You'll be safe here, Dante said, showing me around. Private elevator requires a code to access this floor, security cameras on every entrance, my men stationed in the building 24/7. It's lovely, I said, and meant it, but I couldn't help adding, it needs flowers. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. Then you'll add them, he said. Make it feel like home, order whatever you need. Consider this your space for as long as you need it. The master bedroom was larger than my entire apartment had been, with a bed that could sleep 4 people and a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. My duffel bag looked pathetic and small when I set it on the pristine white comforter. I'll leave you to settle in, Dante said from the doorway. Luca will bring your flower orders here so you can work. Anything you need, just ask. Dante, I said, and he turned back, waiting. Thank you. For protecting me, for getting me out of there. I know you didn't have to. Yes, he said simply. I did. After he left, I sat on the bed and opened my mother's journal, her familiar handwriting swimming before my tear-blurred eyes. She'd started it when she first opened the shop, documenting every supplier, every grower, every trick she learned for keeping flowers fresh or making arrangements last. And somewhere in these pages, I thought, somewhere in my mother's careful notes might be the information that would help Dante find his sister's killer. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the pages about Juliet roses, my mother's notes on the various growers, their techniques, their customer bases, and I sent them to Dante with a simple message, starting here, let's find them. His response came immediately. Thank you, Maya, for trusting me, for helping, for being brave enough to stay. I looked around the beautiful empty penthouse and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. Wondered if I'd made the right choice. Wondered if I'd ever see my shop again. But then I thought about Lucia Moretti with her flower crown and her dreams of studying botany, murdered at 19 by a monster who thought he could take whatever he wanted. I thought about my mother who'd spent her last months teaching me everything she knew, who'd made me promise to keep the shop alive, to use flowers to bring beauty into the world. And I thought about Dante with his grief and his determination, and the way he'd covered my body with his own when bullets were flying. Whatever happened next, whatever danger I was walking into, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to let Viktor Kozlov, or the Volkov family, or whoever had killed Lucia, get away with it. I was going to use every bit of knowledge my mother had given me, every instinct I had about flowers and the people who loved them, and I was going to help Dante find justice. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the way, I'd figure out why the thought of never seeing him again after this was over made my chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The first 2 days in the safe house passed in a blur of flowers and paperwork and slowly unraveling mysteries. Dante had been true to his word about letting me continue my work, and every morning Luca arrived with orders from the shop, fresh flowers from my suppliers, and updates on the business that somehow seemed to be running more smoothly without me physically there than it ever had when I was doing everything myself. I think your absence is good for sales, Luca said on the second morning, setting down 3 new orders for wedding arrangements. People think you're exclusive now, hard to reach. They're paying premium prices just to get on your schedule. That's ridiculous, I said, but I was looking at the order forms and he was right. The prices were nearly double what I usually charged, and customers were paying without complaint. Dante's doing, Luca said with a shrug. He's been spreading word through his network that Bloom and Thorn is under his protection, that we only take select clients now. People are falling over themselves to be associated with anything connected to him. I should have been angry about the manipulation, but instead I found myself grateful, because for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't constantly worried about making rent. The safe house had slowly transformed under my influence. I couldn't help myself. I'd ordered flowers for every room, arrangements that brought color and life and the scent of growing things into the sterile modern space. Dante hadn't commented, but I'd caught him standing in front of a vase of white peonies I'd placed in the living room, just looking at them with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother's journal lay open on the dining table, surrounded by printouts of Dante's case files, photographs of crime scenes, delivery receipts, everything we had on the attacks involving Juliet Roses over the past 5 years. I'd been cross-referencing her supplier notes with the dates and locations, looking for patterns, and slowly, painstakingly, a picture was emerging. Dante found me there late on the second afternoon. Papers spread everywhere, 3 different flower catalogs open, my laptop showing a spreadsheet I'd created tracking every detail I could find. "You've been at this for 6 hours," he said, and I looked up to find him standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "You need to take a break." "I can't," I said, gesturing at the organized chaos in front of me. "I'm so close. There's a pattern here. I can feel it. Just give me a little more time." He set the coffee down beside me and leaned over my shoulder to look at what I was working on, close enough that I could smell that sandalwood scent that seemed to cling to him, feel the warmth of his body against my back. "What have you found?" he asked, his voice low and interested. I pulled up the spreadsheet showing every Juliet Rose delivery I'd tracked. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the supplier column. "Every single one. Lucia's murder, the roses sent to your father 3 days ago, tonight's delivery to your apartment, and these 3 other incidents you've been investigating, they all trace back to the same source." "Which source?" he asked, and I heard the tension in his voice. "Rosewood Estates," I said, pulling out my mother's journal and showing him her notes. "It's a private cultivation facility about 2 hours outside the city. They specialize in rare and expensive varieties. My mother worked with them years ago before they became so exclusive." Dante was very still, his hand resting on the table beside mine. "How certain are you?" he asked. "Completely," I said, showing him the evidence I'd compiled. "Look at the petal structure in these photographs. See how the edges curl slightly inward. That's characteristic of Rosewood's proprietary growing method. They use a specific combination of soil pH and light exposure that creates this exact effect. And here, look at the stem thickness, the thorn placement. These roses all came from rosewood. I'd stake my professional reputation on it." "Then that's where we find our killer," Dante said, and his voice had gone hard and cold. "If all the roses came from there, if that's the common thread, then someone at Rosewood is either our target or knows who is." "There's a problem, though," I said, pulling up Rosewood's website on my laptop. "They're not just exclusive, they're paranoid about security. You can't just walk in and ask questions. They only sell to registered clients, require membership that costs thousands of dollars a year, and they don't give tours or allow visitors without appointments approved weeks in advance." "So we get you approved for membership," Dante said. "We buy our way in." I shook my head. "It's not that simple. Membership requires references from existing members, a background check, an interview process. It could take months, and we don't have months. Not if Victor and whoever he's working for are already moving against you." Dante moved away from the table, and I watched him pace, his mind clearly working through options and discarding them. "I can't go in as myself," he said. "Too recognizable, too risky. If whoever we're looking for has connections to Rosewood, they'll be alerted the moment I show up." Unless, I said slowly, an idea forming. Unless you're not going in as Dante Moretti, the crime boss. Unless you're going in as someone else entirely. He stopped pacing and looked at me with interest. "What are you thinking?" "There's an event," I said, pulling up an invitation I'd found in my mother's files. "The Rosewood Valentine Gala, it's their annual showcase. They invite members and their guests to preview new varieties, network, celebrate rare flowers. It's the one night a year when they open their doors to people who aren't on their permanent client list as long as they're accompanied by a member." "And you're a member," he said, understanding dawning. "My mother was," I corrected. "And I inherited her membership. I've never used it because I couldn't afford the yearly dues, but technically it's still active." I checked. "They sent me an invitation 3 weeks ago and I ignored it because the ticket price alone was $500. "Not anymore," Dante said, already pulling out his phone. "When is it?" "2 days," I said. "February 16th, black tie, held at their main facility. It's perfect timing, actually. We'd have access to their grounds, their staff, maybe even their client records if we can get into the offices." He was typing rapidly on his phone, presumably messaging Luca or one of his other people. "This could work," he said. "We go in together, you as the member and me as your guest, your boyfriend. We blend in, ask questions, see who knows about the Juliet roses." "There's just one problem," I said, feeling heat creep up my neck. "If we're going to convince anyone that we're a couple, that you're my boyfriend and not my bodyguard or business associate, we need to be believable. We need to look comfortable together, act like we actually know each other." Dante's gray eyes met mine and I saw heat flash in them. "Then we practice," he said. "We spend the next 2 days learning each other, becoming convincing, making sure no one at that gala has any reason to doubt that we're exactly what we claim to be." The thought of practicing being Dante's girlfriend made my stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Okay," I said, trying to sound professional and calm. "Okay, that makes sense. We should start now, establish our cover story." He moved back to the table and sat down across from me, close enough that our knees almost touched. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Everything. Your childhood, your family, your favorite things, what makes you happy, what scares you. If we're going to pretend to be in love, I need to know you." I took a sip of the coffee he'd brought, using the moment to gather my thoughts. "I grew up in the shop," I said. "My mother opened Blumenthorn when I was 3, my father left when I was 5, just walked out one day and never came back, so it was always just me and her. She taught me everything about flowers, about running a business, about being strong even when you want to fall apart." "She sounds remarkable," Dante said softly. "She was," I said, feeling the familiar ache of missing her. "She was funny and fierce, and she could make anyone smile. She believed flowers had language, that you could say things with blooms that words couldn't express. She taught me that roses mean love, but the color matters, that lilies mean devotion, that forget-me-nots mean exactly what they sound like." "And what do Juliet roses mean?" he asked. I looked at him, this dangerous man who'd entered my life through a wrong delivery, who was hunting his sister's killer with single-minded determination. "Enduring love," I said quietly. "The kind that lasts beyond reason, beyond death. The kind that borders on obsession." His expression shifted, something vulnerable showing through his usual control. "That fits," he said. "Whoever is using them understands flowers the way your mother did, the way you do. They're choosing them deliberately for their meaning." "Now you," I said, needing to shift the focus away from the intensity of his gaze. "Tell me about you, about your family, about who Dante Moretti was before he became whoever you are now." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "I was supposed to be a lawyer," he said, and I couldn't hide my surprise. My father wanted me to go legitimate, to use my education to protect the family legally instead of through force. I was accepted to Columbia Law School, had plans to start that fall. But then the car bomb, I said. Then the car bomb, he confirmed, and suddenly I was the head of an organization I'd been raised in but never expected to lead, 19 years old and responsible for hundreds of people, billions in assets, generations of tradition and expectation. Did you resent it? I asked. Taking over, giving up your plans. Every day for the first year, he admitted. I was drowning, making mistakes, learning through trial and error how to command respect, how to make hard decisions, how to be the kind of leader people would follow. Luca saved me honestly. He was my father's protege, and he taught me everything: how to read people, how to negotiate, how to survive. And Lucia, I said gently, where was she in all this? Devastated, he said, his voice roughening. She was 14 when our parents died, already dealing with normal teenage stuff, and then suddenly her whole world exploded. I tried to protect her, to give her as normal a life as possible. I sent her to private school, made sure she had security but from a distance, let her have friends and activities and dreams. She wanted to study botany, I said, remembering what he'd told me. She wanted to open a flower shop like my mother's, I said. Maybe they would have been friends. Maybe, Dante said, and smiled slightly. They would have liked each other, your mother with her language of flowers, and Lucia with her determination to understand how things grew. They both saw beauty in petals and stems. Both believed flowers mattered. They do matter, I said. More than people realize, they mark the important moments, births and deaths, weddings and funerals, apologies and celebrations. My mother used to say that flowers are how we remember to feel when the world makes us numb. Dante reached across the table and took my hand, the gesture natural, easy, like we'd done it 100 times before. You're like her, he said. You see the beauty in things, the meaning. Even when you're surrounded by danger and uncertainty, you bring flowers into empty spaces and make them feel like home. I looked down at our joined hands, his larger and scarred, mine smaller and stained with pollen. This feels real, I said softly. Not like practice. Good, Dante said. That's exactly how it should feel. We spent the rest of the evening going through the motions of being a couple, sitting close on the couch while he told me stories about growing up in his family, me sharing memories of my mother and the shop. At some point, Luca brought dinner and raised his eyebrows at how we were sitting, my legs tucked under me and angled toward Dante, his arms stretched along the back of the couch behind my shoulders. Looking cozy, boss, Luca said with barely suppressed amusement. Just practicing, Dante said. But his hand had dropped to my shoulder and stayed there even after Luca left. The touching was the hardest part, or maybe the easiest, I couldn't decide. Dante was right that we needed to be comfortable with casual intimacy if anyone was going to believe we were together. So we practiced. His hand at the small of my back when we stood, my hand on his arm when we walked, fingers intertwined when we sat. Each touch felt electric, charged with an awareness that made my breath catch and my skin heat. If we're going to convince anyone, Dante said at one point, standing close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, you need to be comfortable with me touching you like this. His hand settled on my waist, warm and possessive, and I fought not to shiver. I am comfortable, I said, my voice coming out breathless. I mean, I am comfortable. You're trembling, he said, and there was something almost tender in his voice. Is it fear? That's not discomfort, I admitted before I could stop myself, then felt heat flood my face. I mean, it's just, you're very close and you can feel it too, Dante said. Not a question, more like a confirmation of something he already knew. This thing between us, whatever it is. Yes, I whispered, I can feel it. He lifted his hand and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture gentle, deliberate, his fingers lingering against my cheek. Making it look natural, he said quietly. But his eyes said something else entirely. The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility, and then his phone rang, breaking the spell. He stepped back, answered in clipped Italian, and I stood there trying to calm my racing heart. That night, I couldn't sleep despite my exhaustion. My mind kept replaying every moment of the evening, every touch, every look, the way he'd said my name, the heat in his eyes when our hands had brushed. I gave up around 2 in the morning and padded out to the kitchen for water, not bothering to change out of the oversized shirt I'd been sleeping in. I found Dante already there, standing at the window looking out at the city, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt that made him look younger, more approachable, almost normal. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without turning around. Too much on my mind, I admitted, moving to stand beside him. The city was beautiful from up here. Millions of lights marking millions of lives. People sleeping and working and living their normal safe existences, while we planned to infiltrate an exclusive flower gala to catch a killer. Do you ever wish you could just be normal? I asked, the question escaping before I could censor it. Run a business, fall in love, not look over your shoulder every second. Dante was quiet for a long moment. Every day, he said finally. But normal died with Lucia. Normal died with my parents. This is who I am now. This is all I know how to be. That's sad, I said softly. She wouldn't want that for you, your sister. She wouldn't want you to sacrifice your whole life to avenging hers. How do you know? He asked. And there was real curiosity in his voice. You never met her. Because I know what it's like to lose someone and feel like you have to honor them by suffering, I said, thinking of my mother. After she died, I threw myself into the shop, worked 16-hour days, never took breaks, never saw friends. I thought that was what she would have wanted, thought I was being devoted, but I was really just punishing myself for still being alive when she wasn't. What changed? He asked, turning to look at me now. I found a letter she'd written, I said. Hidden in her desk, meant to be found after she was gone, she told me that she wanted me to live, really live, not just survive. She made me promise to find joy, to fall in love, to take risks, to be more than just the keeper of her legacy. Dante's expression was unreadable. Did you keep that promise? I'm trying, I said. It's hard. The shop was failing. I was drowning in debt. Survival took all my energy. But then I knocked on the wrong door and met you, and suddenly I'm caught up in this impossible situation, and I'm more terrified than I've ever been, but also more alive. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, he said quietly. You're not what I expected, Maya. What did you expect? I asked. Someone I could let go of when this was over, he said, and his honesty made my breath catch. Someone who would help me find answers and then disappear back into their normal life. Someone I could thank and forget and move on from. And now, I whispered. Now, he said, his gray eyes intense on mine. I don't think I'll ever be able to forget you. I don't think I'll want to. You've brought flowers into my safe house and light into my darkness, and you make me think that maybe, just maybe, normal isn't as dead as I thought it was. We stood there in the dim kitchen, close but not touching, and I felt something shift between us, deepening, intensifying, becoming something neither of us could deny anymore. The gala is in 2 days, I said, needing to break the moment before I did something reckless like kiss him. Are you ready to pretend to be my boyfriend? I'm ready to be whatever you need me to be, he said. At the gala and after, if you'll let me. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him that this was business, that when we found his sister's killer, I'd go back to my life, and he'd go back to his, that we came from different worlds that didn't overlap. But standing there in the quiet darkness, with the city spread out below us, and his eyes full of something that looked like hope, I found I couldn't say any of those things. So instead, I just nodded and said, teach me how to be comfortable with you, how to make this look real, How to convince everyone at Rosewood that we belong together. We have 2 days, he said, and his hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. That's not much time to create a believable relationship. Then we'd better not waste any of it, I said. And this time when he touched me, when his fingers traced the line of my jaw and tangled in my hair, I leaned into it instead of fighting it, let myself feel the attraction I'd been trying to deny since the moment he'd opened his door. This is still practice? I asked breathlessly. Sure, Dante said, but his smile was wolfish and his eyes were dark with want. We're practicing being unable to keep our hands off each other, practicing looking at each other like we're the only two people in the world, practicing falling. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew what he'd been about to say, what we were both trying not to acknowledge even as we leaned closer, even as the space between us disappeared. The kiss didn't happen that night. We both pulled back at the last second, some unspoken agreement that once we crossed that line, there would be no going back to pretending this was just convenience or cover. But the almost kiss hung between us, charged and full of promise, and when I finally went back to bed, my lips tingled with anticipation, and my heart raced with something that felt dangerously close to hope. 2 days until the gala, 2 days to perfect our act, 2 days to prepare to walk into the place where all the Juliet roses came from and hopefully find the person who'd been using them as weapons. 2 days to figure out if what was growing between Dante and me was real or just the product of forced proximity and shared danger. But, lying in the dark listening to the city sounds and knowing he was just down the hall, probably not sleeping either, I thought I already knew the answer, had known it from the moment our hands had touched over photographs of crime scenes and flowers, had known it from the way he said my name, and the way I felt safe despite being in more danger than ever before. This wasn't practice anymore if it ever had been. This was real and terrifying and inevitable. And in 2 days, we'd walk into Rosewood Estates as a couple, and I had a feeling that by the time we walked out, everything would have changed. The dress arrived the morning of the gala in a garment bag that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be, and when I unzipped it, I found deep red silk that shimmered like liquid rubies, a design that was elegant and sophisticated and completely unlike anything I'd ever owned. Dante had it delivered while I was working on arrangements, along with shoes and jewelry and a note in his precise handwriting that read simply, "For tonight, you need to look like you belong to me." I should have been insulted by the presumption, but instead I found myself tracing the words with my finger and wondering when exactly I'd started wanting to belong to him. The safe house had been a flurry of activity all day. Luca coming and going with updates on security at Rosewood, background checks on staff members, floor plans of the facility. "We know Victor has been a client there for 5 years, Luca said, spreading photos across the dining table. He has a private section in Greenhouse 3, pays premium rates for exclusive access. The staff won't talk about what he grows there, but the records show regular purchases of Juliet Rose stock." "That's our confirmation then," I said, looking at the evidence we'd compiled. Every attack, every threat, every rose sent to intimidate or mark a victim, they all came from Victor's private greenhouse at Rosewood. "Which means tonight, we get proof," Dante said, and there was ice in his voice. "We get photographs, documentation, everything we need to destroy him." I looked at him standing there in his dress shirt and slacks, not yet in his tux, but already devastating, and felt my stomach flip with nerves that had nothing to do with the danger we were walking into. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "About me coming with you. About using the gala as cover. Victor knows who I am. He's been watching me. What if he's there tonight?" "Then I protect you," Dante said simply, crossing to where I stood and taking my hands. "Maya, I need you to understand something. I would never have agreed to this plan if I thought I couldn't keep you safe. Luca will be there as backup. We'll have men positioned around the grounds. The moment anything feels wrong, we leave. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. But we need to find out what's in that greenhouse," I said. "We need proof." "We will," Dante said. "But not at the cost of your safety, never that. You're too important. To the investigation, I asked, though I knew what he really meant. To everything he said quietly, and the way he was looking at me made it hard to breathe. The drive to Rosewood Estates took almost 2 hours, and I spent most of it trying not to stare at Dante in his tuxedo. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, all sharp angles and expensive fabric, dangerous and elegant in equal measure. You clean up nice, I said, trying for lightness and failing. So do you, he said, his eyes traveling over me in a way that made heat pool low in my stomach. That dress is perfect. You look like you were born to wear it. I feel like I'm playing dress-up, I admitted, smoothing the silk nervously, like a little girl in her mother's clothes pretending to be sophisticated. You look sophisticated, Dante said. You look beautiful. You look like exactly the kind of woman who would be on my arm at an exclusive event, and everyone there is going to believe we're together because I won't be able to stop looking at you. The words hung between us, more honest than our usual careful banter, and I found myself reaching for his hand, needing the connection. Thank you, I said quietly. For the dress, for tonight, for making me feel like I can do this. You can do this, Dante said, lacing his fingers through mine. You're brilliant and brave, and you've already figured out more about these roses than I managed in 5 years. Tonight is just the next step. Rosewood Estates appeared through the trees like something from a fairy tale, all Gothic architecture and modern glass, sprawling grounds lit with thousands of tiny lights. The main building was palatial, stone and timber and soaring windows, and behind it I could see the greenhouses, massive structures glowing from within like captured stars. It's beautiful, I breathed, and it was, intimidatingly so. Dante's hand settled at the small of my back as we walked toward the entrance, the touch possessive and warm even through the silk of my dress. Remember, he said quietly, we're here as a couple. You're my girlfriend. We're interested in rare roses for our future home. We're charming and forgettable and completely harmless. Got it, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Charming and harmless, I can do that. The ballroom was spectacular, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across hundreds of guests in evening wear, champagne flowing from fountains, and roses everywhere, climbing the walls, arranged in massive displays, their scent almost overwhelming. Every variety I'd ever seen, and some I hadn't, but it was the Juliet roses that dominated, deep pink and perfect, displayed like the treasures they were. Maya Chen, the woman at the registration desk said, checking her list. Member legacy from Helen Chen. Welcome back to Rosewood. We've missed you, and this must be your guest. Dante Moretti, I said, introducing him with what I hoped was appropriate casualness. My boyfriend, he's been dying to see the facility. He has quite the appreciation for rare blooms. The woman's eyes traveled over Dante with obvious appreciation. Welcome, Mr. Moretti. Please enjoy the evening. The tour of Greenhouse 3 begins at 8, and dinner will be served at 9. We moved into the crowd, and immediately I felt Dante's demeanor shift, becoming more relaxed, charming, playing the role of wealthy boyfriend with ease that suggested he'd done this kind of thing before. He got us champagne and we circulated, making small talk with other guests. And I found myself falling into the rhythm of it, using my flower knowledge to establish credibility, mentioning casually that I owned a shop and was considering writing a book about rare varieties. You're a natural at this, Dante murmured at one point, his lips close to my ear. At what I asked. Deception, he said, but there was admiration in his voice. You're charming them all, getting information without them realizing they're being interrogated. I learned from the best I said, and felt him smile against my hair. The head grower was a woman in her 60s named Margaret, who lit up when I mentioned my mother's name. Helen Chen, she said warmly. I remember her well. She had an extraordinary eye for quality. She could spot a diseased plant from across a greenhouse. I was so sorry to hear of her passing. Thank you, I said. genuine emotion making my voice thick. She loved this place, loved what you do here. She always said Rosewood set the standard for cultivation. Margaret beamed at the compliment. We try to maintain those standards. Every rose that leaves here represents years of careful breeding, precise environmental control. We have clients who've been with us for decades because they know our quality is unmatched. I imagine your client list is quite exclusive, I said carefully. The kind of people who appreciate true rarity. Oh, yes, Margaret said, warming to the topic. We have members from all over the world, collectors, designers, people who understand that a rosewood rose isn't just a flower, it's a work of art. Take our Juliet roses, for example. We have several clients who order them exclusively, won't accept blooms from any other grower. Really, I said, trying to sound casual. I'd love to know more about that for my book, the people who choose Juliet roses specifically, what draws them to that variety. Margaret glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Well, I probably shouldn't say, but since you're Helen's daughter, we have one client who's been with us for 5 years, orders Juliet roses year-round, very particular about quality, sends his assistant to pick them up personally because he doesn't trust shipping. His assistant, I said, my heart beginning to race. Not him directly. A young woman, Margaret said. Beautiful but cold. Very specific requirements. She inspects every bloom personally, rejects anything that's not absolutely perfect. I remember once she made us throw out an entire batch because one petal had a slight discoloration. Do you remember her name? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Margaret frowned. Irina, I think, or something similar. Russian, maybe? She always came when Mr. Kozlov was traveling, said he trusted her to handle the selection while he was away. My blood went cold. Viktor Kozlov, I said. He's a client here. One of our most valued, Margaret said, not noticing my reaction. He maintains a private section in Greenhouse 3, pays premium rates for exclusive access, grows his own Juliet roses under our guidance. He's quite the enthusiast. I need to find Dante, I said, making excuses to Margaret and moving through the crowd with purpose. I found him near the windows talking to an older couple, but something in my expression made him excuse himself immediately. What is it? He asked, his hand finding mine. What did you learn? Victor has a private greenhouse here, I said quietly. Section 3. He's been growing Juliet roses for 5 years, but Dante, he doesn't pick them up himself. He sends Irina, his assistant. She comes when he's traveling. She's the one who selects the blooms. Dante went very still. Irina Volkov, he said. Victor's boss's daughter. The same, I said. Margaret described her perfectly. Beautiful but cold, obsessed with perfection. And here's the thing, I checked the dates in your files against what Margaret told me. Every attack, every rose delivery connected to Lucia's murder. They all happened when Victor was out of the country. His eyes met mine and I saw understanding dawn. It wasn't Victor, he said slowly. It was her, Irina. She's been using his access, his greenhouse, his reputation. She's been using the roses as her signature, I said, the pieces falling into place. Dante, what if Victor wasn't the one obsessed with Lucia? What if it was Irina? What if she saw Lucia as competition for Victor's attention? Lucia's diary, Dante said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. There was an entry, weeks before she died, about a persistent admirer who sent roses and poetry. I always assumed it was Victor, but what if? What if it was Irina? I finished. Obsessed with Victor, but jealous of anyone he showed interest in, using flowers as messages, as threats, as weapons. We need to get into that greenhouse, Dante said. We need proof, photographs, something concrete we can use. The tour, I said. It starts in 20 minutes. Greenhouse 3 is on the route. We can slip away from the group, get the evidence we need. Dante was already texting Luca, arranging backup, planning the operation, and I felt adrenaline start to override my fear. We were so close. 5 years of hunting, and we'd finally found the connection. The orchestra began playing, and Dante looked at me, some of the tension leaving his face. "We have time before the tour," he said. "Dance with me." What I asked, confused by the sudden change of topic. "Dance with me," he repeated, leading me toward the floor where other couples were already swaying. "We need to maintain our cover, and I need to hold you while I still can, before everything changes." I let him pull me into his arms, one hand at my waist and the other clasping mine, and we moved together in a waltz that felt too natural, too right. "You're very good at this," I said, trying to focus on the steps and not on how close he was, how his body felt against mine. At what he asked, his breath warm against my temple. At pretending, I said, though even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. "I'm not sure either of us is pretending anymore," he said quietly, and when I looked up, his gray eyes were intense on mine. "Maya, after tonight, after we find the proof we need and this is over, I want." He didn't get to finish because that's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching us with eyes like chips of ice. She was beautiful in the way poisonous things are beautiful, pale skin and dark hair and features that would have been perfect if they weren't so cold, so devoid of warmth. "Dante," I said, my hand tightening on his shoulder. 3 o'clock, dark hair, green dress, is that?" "Irina Volkov," he confirmed, his body tensing. "She's here." "We need to leave," I said, fear spiking through me. "Now. Before she—" "Too late," he said, because she was moving toward us, cutting through the crowd with purpose, and behind her I saw Viktor Kozlov, the man from the surveillance footage, the enforcer who'd been watching my shop. They'd been waiting for us. I realized with growing horror, this whole thing had been a trap. Before what Irina said, appearing beside us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Before you realize you've walked into a trap, the florist who delivered roses to the wrong address. Except it wasn't wrong, was it? I made sure you'd go to 7A. I wanted Dante to find you, to bring you here, to confirm you're working together." Dante moved immediately, positioning himself between me and Irina, his hand going to where I knew he kept a gun concealed. "This ends tonight, Irina," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Yes," Irina said, still smiling that terrible smile. "It does, Victor." The enforcer moved closer, and I saw he had a gun as well, hidden under his jacket, but unmistakably there. Irina's eyes traveled over me with clinical assessment. "You're prettier than Lucia was," she said conversationally. "More curves, less innocence. I can see why Dante is interested, but you have the same problem she did. You're in my way." "You killed her," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "You killed Lucia because you were jealous." "Jealous?" Irina laughed, the sound brittle and wrong. "I wasn't jealous. I was protecting what was mine. Victor couldn't see it, couldn't see that she was using him, batting her eyes and playing innocent while he fell all over himself trying to impress her. He was mine, and she tried to take him." "So you murdered her," Dante said, and his voice was ice over rage. "You sent her roses, broke into her home, killed a 19-year-old girl because of your sick obsession." "She rejected him," Irina said, and for the first time I heard real emotion in her voice. Victor offered her everything, his protection, his devotion, his love, and she rejected him like he was nothing, like we were nothing. She had to learn that actions have consequences. "And the others?" I asked, thinking of the attacks Dante had been tracking. "The roses sent to intimidate, to threaten, were those all you too?" Irina's smile widened. "Messages," she said. "Reminders to Dante that I could reach anyone he cared about, that no one was safe. I thought eventually he'd give up, accept that he couldn't win, but he's stubborn, kept investigating, kept pushing, so I had to get creative." "The florist," I said, understanding. "You used my delivery to confirm his location, to see if he'd protect me." "And he did," Irina said, looking at Dante with something like amusement. "Predictable, really. You always were soft under all that power. Your sister was your weakness. Now this florist is. You can't help yourself, can you? Always trying to save people who can't be saved. Maya can be saved, Dante said. Let her go. This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with what happened to Lucia. But she does, Irina said. She solved it, didn't she? Your clever little florist with her flower expertise. She figured out that the roses came from here, that I was the one selecting them, using them. She's too dangerous to leave alive. We're in a room full of people, I said, trying to sound brave. You can't just kill us here. Can I? Irina said, and gestured toward the ballroom, where I suddenly noticed that the crowd had thinned, that the remaining guests were moving toward the exits under the direction of men in suits, who I now recognized as Volkov soldiers. Fire alarm will go off in about 3 minutes, she said. Everyone will evacuate, except us. Except you two, who will tragically be trapped when the greenhouses catch fire. So sad. Such a terrible accident. You've planned this, I said, horror washing over me. This whole gala, you knew we'd come. I've been planning this for weeks, Irina said. Ever since I sent those roses to Dante's door, ever since I saw you on the security footage and realized he was using a florist to investigate, I knew you'd trace them back here, knew you'd come to the gala. I just had to wait, to set the stage, to make sure when you died it looked like tragic coincidence. Luca, I said to Dante. You're back up. Being detained, Irina said pleasantly. Along with all of Dante's other men, Victor is very thorough. You're alone, outgunned, and in about 2 minutes this entire facility is going to be an inferno. Your choice is simple. You can try to fight your way out and die in the crossfire. Or you can come quietly, and maybe, just maybe, I'll make it quick. Dante's hand found mine and squeezed once, hard, and I knew he was calculating odds, planning, looking for any way out. The greenhouse, I said suddenly. The private section, Victor's roses. If they burn, you lose 5 years of cultivation. All that work, all those perfect Juliet roses. Irina's expression flickered, just for a second, uncertainty showing through. The roses can be replaced, she said, but her voice wasn't quite as confident. Can they? I pressed, using my knowledge, my expertise, my only weapon. Juliet roses take 15 years to perfect, specific soil conditions, precise environmental controls. If greenhouse 3 burns, you lose not just the current stock but the root systems, the established plants, everything Victor has built, that you've been maintaining. She's right, Victor said, speaking for the first time, his accented voice rough. The roses, we cannot replace them. 5 years of work. They're just flowers, Irina snapped, but I could see I'd gotten to her, found the crack in her plan. No, I said. They're not just flowers. They're art. They're perfection. They're the signature you've been using to mark your territory, to claim your kills. Without them, you're just another killer. With them, you're something special, something unique. Dante was moving even as I spoke, using my distraction to pull his gun, to aim at Irina, and suddenly everything was chaos. Victor shouted, Irina screamed, gunfire erupted, and Dante was pulling me down, covering me with his body as bullets shattered the crystal chandeliers above us. The fire alarm began to wail, smoke starting to pour from the greenhouses visible through the windows, and I realized Irina had already set the fires, already committed to burning it all down. Run, Dante said, pulling me toward a side exit. Now, Maya, run. We ran through hallways filling with smoke, past evacuating staff, toward what I hoped was safety. But behind us I could hear Irina screaming orders, Victor's heavy footsteps, the sound of pursuit. The greenhouse, Dante said, changing direction. We need evidence, proof. If we leave now, she wins. She burns everything and we have nothing. You're insane, I gasped, but I followed him anyway, through a door that led outside, across grounds lit by spreading fire, toward the glass structure labeled Greenhouse 3. Inside it was hellishly beautiful, flames consuming roses in a display that was both horrifying and mesmerizing. Juliet roses burning like offerings, and in the center was Victor's private section, still untouched by fire. Dante was already photographing everything: the labels, the planting logs, the records that showed 5 years of cultivation, all the proof we needed that these roses, these specific blooms, had been used in every attack connected to Lucia's murder. "Got it," he said, pulling me back toward the exit. "Let's go." But Irina was there, blocking our path, her dress smudged with ash, her face twisted with rage. "You couldn't just die," she said, raising her gun. "You couldn't make this easy." "Neither could you," I said, and threw the only thing I had, a clay pot full of soil and roots that hit her square in the chest, making her stumble. Dante moved then, faster than I'd ever seen him move, disarming her with brutal efficiency. And suddenly it was over, Irina on the ground, the gun sliding away across the floor, the greenhouse burning around us. Victor Dante shouted, and the enforcer appeared in the doorway, his own gun raised. But he wasn't aiming at us. He was looking at Irina with an expression of such betrayal, such pain, that I almost felt sorry for him. "She killed that girl," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Lucia Moretti, she killed her because of me." "Yes," Dante said. "And she's been using your resources, your reputation, your roses to kill others, to threaten my family, all while you thought she loved you." Victor's gun hand trembled. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know what she was doing." The greenhouse roof groaned, flames eating through support beams, and I knew we had seconds before the whole structure came down. "We need to leave," I said. "All of us now, before we're trapped." Victor looked at Irina, at the woman he'd loved who'd turned out to be a monster, and then he looked at us. "Go," he said. "Take her. Turn her in. Let her face justice. I won't stop you." The greenhouse collapsed behind us as we dragged Irina outside, flames shooting into the night sky, destroying 5 years of careful cultivation, burning away the roses that had been used as weapons. Luca appeared with police and federal agents, apparently having escaped his detention, and suddenly there were handcuffs on Irina's wrists, rights being read, questions being asked. Dante gave them everything: the photographs, the evidence, the testimony, and through it all he kept his hand on my back, keeping me close, keeping me safe. "You did it," I said, as dawn broke over the smoking ruins of Rosewood Estates. "You found her. You got justice for Lucia." "We did it," Dante corrected. "You solved it. Your expertise, your knowledge. Without you, I never would have made the connection." I leaned against him, exhausted and smoke-stained and alive, watching federal agents lead Irina Volkov away in handcuffs, and felt something shift in my chest. "It's over," I said. 5 years of hunting, and it's finally over." Dante turned me to face him, his hands framing my face, his eyes intense on mine. "It's over," he agreed. "And now we figure out what comes next, who we are when we're not hunting killers or running from danger. Whether what's between us survives in the real world or burns out like those roses." I kissed him then, surrounded by ash and smoke and the ruins of beauty, and I tasted promise and hope and the beginning of something that felt an awful lot like love. The moment Irina's gun pressed against my spine, all the air left my lungs, and I understood with perfect clarity that I might die tonight, surrounded by flowers in a burning greenhouse. "Move," she said, her voice pleasant like we were old friends taking a stroll, and Victor grabbed Dante's arm with brutal efficiency, disarming him before he could react. "Through there, the private section, we need privacy for this conversation." The private greenhouse was deeper, into the complex, away from the main gala, away from witnesses. And as Victor forced us inside, I saw why Irina had chosen this location. It was beautiful in a nightmarish way, roses climbing every surface, Juliet roses in shades of pink that ranged from pale blush to deep crimson, but mixed among them were other flowers, stargazer lilies with their distinctive spotted petals, their heavy perfume mixing with rose scent to create something cloying and suffocating. Dante's hand found mine as we were pushed toward the center of the space, and I felt him squeeze once, a silent message that might have been reassurance or goodbye. The glass walls reflected everything, multiplying our images into infinity, making it feel like we were trapped in a kaleidoscope of flowers and fear. Sit, Irina commanded, gesturing to two metal chairs that looked like they'd been prepared specifically for this purpose. Both of you, hands where I can see them, and don't even think about trying anything heroic. Victor is very good at his job, and I'd hate for this to get messy before I've had a chance to explain. Explain what Dante asked, his voice deadly calm despite the gun trained on his chest. Why you murdered my sister. Why you've spent 5 years terrorizing my family. Why you think you're going to walk away from this. Oh, I'm definitely walking away from this, Irina said, perching on a potting table like she was holding court. You two, not so much. But I wanted you to understand before you die. I wanted you to know exactly why Lucia had to die, why you have to die, why all of this was necessary. She was insane, I realized, not in the raving, chaotic way, but in the cold, calculating way that was somehow worse. She genuinely believed her actions were justified, that murder was a reasonable response to rejection. You loved Victor, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But he wanted Lucia. Irina's expression twisted with remembered rage. He was obsessed with her, went to some stupid charity event, and saw her across the room, and that was it. He couldn't stop talking about her, her beauty, her innocence, her laugh. It was always Lucia this and Lucia that, until I wanted to scream. So you killed her, Dante said, and I heard 5 years of pain and rage in those 4 words. You killed a 19-year-old girl because you were jealous. Jealous, Irina repeated, tasting the word. No, protective. I was protecting what was mine. Victor belonged to me. We'd been together for 3 years. I'd stood by him through everything, and then this girl, this child, shows up and suddenly I don't exist. Suddenly he's sending her roses, writing her poetry, following her around like a lovesick puppy. Lucia rejected him, I said, remembering what Dante had told me. She wasn't interested. She told him to leave her alone. She humiliated him, Irina snapped. Rejected him in front of witnesses at some gallery opening. Told him he was too old for her, that she'd never be interested in someone like him. Victor was devastated, wounded, and all I could think was good. Maybe now he'll come back to me. Maybe now he'll remember who actually loves him. But he didn't, I guessed. He withdrew, felt guilty, pulled away from you too. Irina's laugh was bitter. He moped around for weeks, talking about how he'd misread signals, how he'd made a fool of himself, how Lucia deserved better than his attention. It was pathetic. I couldn't stand it. So I decided if I couldn't have the Victor I fell in love with, if she'd broken him beyond repair, then she needed to pay for what she'd done. You sent her roses, I said, putting the pieces together. Juliet roses from Victor's greenhouse here. Made it look like he was escalating his pursuit. I wanted to scare her first, Irina admitted. Wanted her to know that rejection has consequences, that you can't just dismiss people who love you and expect no repercussions. I sent roses with messages, poetry, things that would make her uncomfortable, make her look over her shoulder. And when that wasn't enough, Dante said, his voice like ice. When she didn't run away, scared, you decided to kill her. She still didn't take him seriously, Irina said, and for the first time I heard real emotion cracking through her controlled facade. Even with the roses, even with the messages, she just told her brother, told you, got security increased. But she didn't leave town, didn't hide. She kept living her life like Victor's love, like my warning, didn't matter. So yes, I killed her. Valentine's Day, I said softly. You chose Valentine's Day because it was symbolic. The day of love, Irina agreed. The day Victor should have been with me but was instead pining over a girl who'd rejected him. I made sure he was out of the country, made sure I had an alibi. And then I sent men to her house, had them make it look like a robbery. But I needed her to know, needed her last thoughts to be about those roses, about how she should have taken the warning seriously. Dante was shaking beside me, his whole body vibrating with barely controlled rage. "You murdered her," he said. "You broke into her home and you murdered her and you arranged her body with roses like she was some kind of offering." "I made her beautiful," Irina said, and her voice had gone dreamy, disconnected. "Put a crown of Juliet roses on her head just like she used to wear, made sure Victor would know, made sure when he saw the photos he'd understand that this was because of him, because of what he'd made me do." "Except he didn't understand," Maya said, and I realized she was right. "Victor didn't react the way you wanted, did he? He didn't come running back to you consumed by guilt and need." He pulled further away. Irina's face contorted with fury. "He felt responsible. Said Lucia's death was his fault for pursuing her, for making himself a target that I would use against innocents. He tried to end things with me, said he couldn't be with someone while carrying that guilt, so I had to make him understand that we were in this together, that the only way forward was together." "So you kept killing," I said, horror washing over me. "All those attacks Dante's been tracking, the roses sent to intimidate and threaten, those were you trying to bind Victor to you through shared crimes." "If we were both guilty," Irina said, "he couldn't leave me, couldn't judge me, we'd be partners in this. So yes, I orchestrated attacks, I used his greenhouse access, his roses, his reputation, and I made sure he knew about each one, made sure he felt complicit even if he didn't actively participate. Victor had been silent through all this, standing guard with his gun, but his face had gone gray, his hands were shaking. "I didn't know," he said finally, his accented voice rough with emotion. "I suspected, I wondered, but I told myself it couldn't be true, that you wouldn't, that I was being paranoid." "You knew," Dante said, turning his cold gaze on the enforcer. "Maybe not the details, but you knew she was capable of this. You knew she'd killed Lucia, and you did nothing." "What could I do?" Victor asked, and he sounded broken. "Turn her in and admit my own guilt, that my obsession with a girl got her killed, that the woman I loved was a monster I'd created. I was a coward. I chose silence over justice." And tonight I asked Irina, "What's tonight supposed to be? Your grand finale?" "Tonight is the end," Irina said, gesturing around the greenhouse with her gun. "Tonight, I kill the man who's been hunting me for 5 years, and the clever little florist who figured out my system. I burn this place down with you inside, make it look like a tragic accident, and Victor and I disappear, start over somewhere new, leave all this behind." "Victor's not going with you," I said, seeing the truth in his face. "He's done with you, with this. You've lost him, Irina. You killed the girl he wanted and turned yourself into someone he can't love." "Shut up," Irina screamed, turning the gun on me, and I saw Dante move, saw him preparing to throw himself between us. But Victor spoke first. "She's right, Irina. I can't do this anymore. I can't be with you knowing what you've done, what you've made me complicit in. It's over." Irina's hand was shaking now, her careful control fracturing. "You don't mean that," she said. "You're just confused. Once they're dead, once this is behind us, we'll be fine. We'll be happy." "I'll never be happy again," Victor said quietly. "Not after Lucia. Not after knowing that an innocent girl died because of me. Because I couldn't accept rejection like a man. I deserve whatever punishment comes. But you deserve worse." Irina whirled on him, her gun swinging wildly, and in that moment of distraction I saw something that made my heart race with possibility. On her left wrist, barely visible beneath her sleeve, was a medical alert bracelet, the kind people with serious allergies wore, and we were surrounded by stargazer lilies, whose pollen was highly toxic to some people, could trigger severe allergic reactions, even anaphylaxis. "Dante," I said quietly, urgently. "The lilies, look at her bracelet. If we can get pollen in the air." His eyes met mine and I saw understanding flash, saw him give the smallest nod, And then I was moving, lunging toward a display of lilies as if reaching for a weapon, my hand catching the edge of the pot and sending it crashing to the ground. Pollen exploded into the air, a golden cloud that caught the greenhouse lights and drifted on the ventilation currents, and Irina gasped, her free hand going to her throat. "What did you do?" she wheezed, already struggling to breathe. "What did you do?" "Stargazer lily pollen," I said, backing away from her. "You're allergic. It's on your bracelet. You're going into anaphylactic shock." Irina's face was swelling, her airway closing, and her gun hand wavered as she fought for breath. "Victor, move! Help me, my bag! I have an EpiPen!" But Victor just stood there, frozen, watching the woman he'd loved reveal herself as a monster, watching her literally choke on the consequences of her actions. "Please, Victor. Please, I love you." "You killed that girl," Victor said, and his voice was dead, emotionless. "You killed Lucia Moretti because I was stupid enough to pursue her. You've killed others, terrorized innocents. And now you want me to save you? I don't think I will." Dante moved then, using Irina's distraction to lunge at Victor. And suddenly they were fighting, brutal and vicious, years of rage channeled into violence. I watched Dante land blow after blow, watched him fight with a savagery I'd never seen. And I understood that this was 5 years of pain pouring out, 5 years of hunting and waiting and wanting revenge. Victor was good, trained, dangerous, but Dante was fighting for his sister's memory, for justice, for me, and there was no contest. He disarmed Victor with a move that made something crack, sent the enforcer's gun skittering across the floor, and then he had Victor on the ground, his hands around the other man's throat, and I saw murder in his eyes. "Do it," Victor gasped. "I deserve it. I deserve to die for what I let happen." Dante's hands tightened, and I saw Victor's face start to turn purple, saw his struggles weaken, and I knew that in another 30 seconds he'd be dead, that Dante would cross a line he could never uncross. "Dante," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of Irina's labored breathing and Victor's choking. "Dante, please don't do this." He didn't look at me, all his focus on the man beneath him, the man whose obsession had cost Lucia her life. 5 years, he said, and his voice was wrecked. 5 years I've wanted this, wanted to watch the life leave his eyes, wanted him to know what it feels like to have everything stolen. "I know," I said, moving closer despite my fear. "I know you've wanted this. You've earned it. But Dante, please, your sister wouldn't want you to become a killer for her. She'd want you to live, not just survive, to be more than revenge." "She took everything from me," he said, finally, looking at me, and his eyes were bright with tears. "Lucia was everything, and they took her, and I have to make them pay." "No," I said gently. "She took your sister. Don't let her take your soul too. Don't let Irina turn you into what she is. You're better than this. You're the man who protected me, who listened when I talked about flowers, who danced with me like I was precious. Be that man, Dante. Choose that man." His hands were trembling on Victor's throat, the enforcer barely conscious beneath him. "I wanted to kill him," he said, his voice breaking. "I've wanted it for 5 years. I know," I repeated, "but you're more than what you've lost. You're more than your grief, and killing him won't bring her back, won't give you peace. It'll just make you into something Lucia wouldn't recognize." Dante's hands loosened just slightly, and Victor sucked in a desperate breath. "She deserved justice," he said. "She does," I agreed. "And she'll get it. Irina's going into shock. Victor's an accomplice to murder. They'll both face trial, both go to prison, but you don't have to be the one who executes them. You can choose differently. You can choose to live." He looked at Victor beneath him, then at Irina collapsed against the wall, still struggling to breathe, then back at me. "If I let him live," he said slowly, "if I choose mercy over revenge, what then?" "Then you're free," I said. "Free from the weight of vengeance, free to figure out who Dante Moretti is when he's not hunting his sister's killer, free to build something instead of just destroying." His hands released Victor's throat completely, and the enforcer rolled away, gasping and coughing. Dante stood slowly, his whole body shaking with suppressed emotion, and I saw the gun Victor had dropped lying within reach. He could still do it, could still choose violence, and for a long moment I thought he might. Then sirens cut through the night and I saw lights flashing beyond the greenhouse glass, Luca's voice shouting orders, and I realized Dante must have signaled for backup somehow, must have planned for this possibility. "It's over," he said, his voice hollow. 5 years and it's finally over." The doors burst open, and suddenly the greenhouse was full of people, Luca and his men, police officers, federal agents, all of them moving with practiced efficiency. Victor was cuffed and hauled to his feet. Irina was given an emergency epinephrine injection and put on a stretcher, and through it all, Dante just stood there watching like he couldn't quite process that it was really done. "You did it," I said, moving to his side. "You found them. You got justice for Lucia." "We did it," he corrected, and his arm came around my waist, pulling me close. "You solved it. Your knowledge about flowers, your quick thinking with the lilies. Without you, I'd be dead or in custody for murder right now." "Without you, I'd be dead," I said. "You protected me, kept me safe, taught me to be brave enough to act, instead of just being a victim." Luca approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Boss," he said, "they're taking them both into custody, Irina for multiple murders, including Lucia Moretti, Victor as an accessory and accomplice. Between your testimony and the evidence you gathered, they're both going away for life." "Good," Dante said, but the words sounded empty, like he'd imagined this moment differently, imagined feeling something other than exhausted and hollow. "The federal agent in charge wants to talk to you," Luca continued. "About your statement, about how you found them, about whether you want to press additional charges." "Later," Dante said. "Tell them I'll come in tomorrow. Tonight I just need." He trailed off and I saw Luca's expression soften slightly. "Understood, boss. I'll handle the agents. You two get out of here. Go back to the safe house. Rest." We walked out of the greenhouse into the cool night air, and I saw dawn starting to break over the horizon, pink and gold light painting the sky. The gala was long over, the guests evacuated. Rosewood Estates was a crime scene now, yellow tape and flashing lights, and the organized chaos of an investigation. Dante's car was waiting, and we climbed into the back seat in silence, both of us too wrung out for words. The driver pulled away and I watched the greenhouse recede in the distance, that beautiful, deadly place where we'd almost died, where Dante had chosen mercy over revenge, where everything had changed. "You're different," I said finally, "than you were when I knocked on your door 2 weeks ago." "So are you," he said. "The scared florist who just wanted to deliver roses and go home, she's gone, replaced by someone brave enough to face down killers." "I'm still terrified," I admitted, still way out of my depth. "Me too," he said, and his hand found mine. "I spent 5 years so focused on revenge, on finding Lucia's killer, on making them pay, and now that it's over, I don't know who I'm supposed to be, don't know what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" I asked. "You," he said simply. "Us. Whatever this is between us, I want to see if it survives outside of danger and forced proximity. I want to know if you'll stay, even though the threat is gone." I looked at him in the growing light, this dangerous man who'd protected me, trusted me, chosen mercy because I'd asked him to. "I'll stay," I said. "Not because I have to, not because I'm scared or need protection, but because I want to. Because somewhere between the wrong delivery and tonight, I fell for you, Dante Moretti." He kissed me then, deep and desperate and full of promise, and I tasted smoke and grief and hope, tasted the beginning of something that felt like healing. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said. "I didn't mean to, tried not to, but I love you, Maya Chen." "I love you too," I said. "My accidental delivery, my unexpected everything." The sun was fully up now, painting the city in golden light. And somewhere behind us, Irina Volkov and Viktor Kozlov were being taken into custody, facing justice for Lucia's murder and all the violence that had followed. 5 years of hunting was over. 5 years of grief could finally start to transform into something else. And as Dante held me close in the back of that car driving toward a future neither of us had planned, I thought about my mother's belief that flowers had language, that they could express what words couldn't. And I thought about Juliet roses, about enduring love and obsession, and how thin the line between them could be, about how the same flowers could mean devotion or danger depending on who sent them and why. Irina had used roses as weapons, as threats, as symbols of her twisted love, but maybe Dante and I could reclaim them, could make them mean something different, something better, could turn symbols of death back into symbols of life. "We'll get through this," I said. "The investigation, the trial, figuring out who we are without danger driving us together." "Together," he agreed. "We'll get through it together." And as the car carried us toward whatever came next, I believed him, believed in us, believed that sometimes the wrong address was exactly where you needed to be, that sometimes getting lost was how you found your way home. 2 weeks had passed since the night at Rosewood Estates, and I still couldn't walk into my shop without expecting to see Dante standing by the window, or Luca appearing with updates or federal agents asking follow-up questions about Irina's confession. But the shop was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. Business was booming thanks to whatever magic Dante had worked before disappearing from my life, and I should have been happy. Instead, I felt hollow, going through the motions of creating arrangements and filling orders while my heart wasn't really in it. The trial was set for spring, both Irina and Victor facing multiple murder charges including Lucia's death. The federal prosecutor had called twice asking if I'd be willing to testify about the roses, about how I'd traced them back to Rosewood, and each time I'd said yes while wondering if I'd see Dante in the courtroom, or if he'd send representatives like he'd apparently been doing for all the preliminary hearings. He'd kept his promise, I realized on the 5th day of silence. "After this is over, you'll never hear from me again, unless you want to." Those had been his exact words, and true to form, Dante Moretti was a man of his word. The debt to my landlord had been cleared, $18,000 paid in full, with a note that simply said, "Considerate payment for services rendered," no signature, but I knew his handwriting by now. My supplier accounts had all been mysteriously settled. New contracts had appeared from companies I'd never heard of requesting weekly arrangements, and when I'd looked into them, I'd found they were all subsidiaries of Dante's legitimate businesses. He was taking care of me from a distance, making sure I thrived, and then staying away like he'd promised. I should have been grateful, should have been relieved to go back to my normal life without danger or federal investigations or men with guns. But instead I found myself crying into flower arrangements at 2 in the morning, missing the sound of his voice, the way he said my name, the feel of his hand at my back. "You're being ridiculous," I told myself on Valentine's Day morning, 1 year exactly since the wrong delivery that had changed everything. "He's a criminal. He lives in a world of violence. You had 2 weeks of intensity and forced proximity. It wasn't real. It was just adrenaline and danger making everything feel heightened." But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie because what I felt when I remembered Dante choosing mercy over revenge, when I thought about him dancing with me in that hotel suite, when I replayed him saying "I love you" in the greenhouse, none of that was adrenaline. It was real and deep, and it wasn't going away no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. The shop was busy all day with Valentine's orders, couples coming in for last-minute bouquets, delivery requests piling up faster than I could process them, and I threw myself into the work trying not to think about last year, about knocking on the wrong door, about gray eyes and dangerous smiles and the man who'd protected me. My new assistant Emma handled most of the deliveries, a college student studying botany who reminded me painfully of what Lucia might have been if she'd lived. And I stayed in the shop creating arrangements and pretending my heart wasn't breaking. The roses kept catching my attention. I'd ordered Juliet roses for several bouquets because they were traditional for Valentine's Day, and customers were willing to pay premium prices. But every time I touched one, I thought about Irina's obsession, about how she'd twisted something beautiful into something deadly, about how the same flowers could mean love or murder depending on who sent them. I was just finishing a cascade bouquet of white roses and stephanotis when Emma came back from her last delivery looking confused. "There's a delivery for you," she said. "Just arrived. The guy said it was urgent, that he was supposed to wait for your reaction." "A delivery for me?" I asked, setting down my wire cutters. "From who?" "He didn't say," Emma said, gesturing toward the front of the shop where a delivery van was indeed waiting. "Just said to give you this." She handed me a small card in an envelope that felt expensive, heavy stock, the kind of thing Dante would choose, and my hands were shaking as I opened it. The message was in his precise handwriting, each letter carefully formed, and I had to read it twice before the words registered. "I made you a promise that after this was over you'd never hear from me again unless you wanted to. I'm hoping you want to, D." I ran to the front of the shop and found the delivery driver unloading a vase, and when I saw what was inside, my breath caught in my throat, too. Dozen Juliet garden roses, absolutely perfect, the deep pink that meant enduring love, arranged with a skill that spoke of professional care and significant expense. "These are for me," I asked stupidly, and the driver smiled. "From a Mr. Moretti," he said. "He was very specific about the variety, said you'd know what they meant." I knew what they meant, knew that Dante was sending me the same roses Irina had used as weapons, but transforming them, reclaiming them, making them symbols of something better. "Where is he?" I asked, looking past the driver to the street beyond. "He said he'd be waiting," the driver said, pointing toward a car parked across the street. Not the black SUV with tinted windows I'd gotten used to, but a normal sedan, dark blue and unremarkable. And leaning against it was Dante. He looked different in the afternoon sunlight, softer somehow, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual expensive suits. And when our eyes met across the distance, I saw nervousness in his expression, uncertainty, hope. I didn't remember crossing the street, didn't remember moving at all, but suddenly I was standing in front of him and he was looking at me like I was something precious and fragile. "You're late," I said, and my voice came out rough with emotion. "Late," he repeated, confused. "I've been waiting 2 weeks for these flowers," I said. 2 weeks of silence, of wondering if I'd ever see you again, of trying to convince myself I was better off without you. "Maya," he started, but I wasn't finished. "You promised me freedom," I said. "You said I'd never hear from you again unless I wanted to. Did it occur to you that I might want to, that I might be waiting?" "I wasn't sure I should come," he admitted, his hand coming up to cup my face. "I promised you freedom. Promised you could go back to your normal life. I didn't want to drag you into my world, didn't want you to feel obligated because I helped you, or because we went through something intense together." "I am free," I said, leaning into his touch. "Free to choose, free to decide what I want and who I want it with. And I choose you, Dante. Not the dangerous life, not the organization or the violence. I choose you, the man who reads poetry at midnight, who drinks tea at 2 in the morning, who looks at me like I'm a rare rose." "I'm trying to be better," he said quietly. "Trying to be the man you saw in me that night in the greenhouse when you asked me to choose mercy. I've been working with federal prosecutors, testifying against the Volkov family, helping them dismantle the criminal networks. I'm stepping back from my father's organization, trying to build something legitimate." "What kind of something?" I asked. "Security consulting," he said with a slight smile. "Turns out decades of experience in protection and intelligence gathering translates well to the legitimate business world. I've been setting up a firm, hiring people, making connections. It's not entirely clean yet, but it's a start." "Why?" I asked. "Why change everything? Why risk your position, your power?" Because every decision I made, I found myself thinking, what would Maya do, he said. Would Maya approve of this contract? Would Maya think this was the right choice? Would Maya be proud of me or disappointed? You became my conscience, my North Star, and I realized I didn't want to be the man who ran a criminal empire. I wanted to be the man worthy of a woman who sees beauty in flowers and chooses mercy over revenge. You're already that man, I said, tears streaming down my face now. You chose not to kill Victor. You chose to let justice work instead of taking it into your own hands. You've been protecting me from a distance, making sure my business thrived. You're already the man I fell in love with. I love you, he said, his forehead resting against mine. I didn't mean to, tried not to. Spent 2 weeks staying away because I thought it was what you needed. But I love you, Maya Chen. And I'm hoping, I'm praying, that you'll let me be part of your life. Not the dangerous parts, not the criminal world. Just me. Just Dante trying to figure out how to be normal. I love you too, I said, and kissed him right there on the street in front of my shop. Kissed him like I'd been wanting to for 2 weeks, deep and desperate and full of promise. When we pulled apart, he was smiling, really smiling, joy transforming his features in a way I'd never seen. Come inside, I said, taking his hand. Help me close up, we have a lot to talk about. The shop felt different with him in it, warmer somehow, more complete. And I watched him move through the space, touching arrangements and examining flowers with careful curiosity. You've done well, he said, gesturing at the full order board, the professional displays, the evidence of a thriving business. Thanks to you, I said. Whatever you did, whoever you convinced to order from me, it worked. I'm actually profitable for the first time in 3 years. I just made some suggestions, he said. Told people I knew that Bloom and Thorn was the best florist in the city, that the owner was brilliant and talented and deserved their business. The rest was all you. Show me how to make an arrangement, he said suddenly. Teach me what you do. I want to understand this world you've built. I pulled out flowers for a wedding order I needed to finish, a cascade of roses and peonies and ranunculus in shades of blush and cream. Okay, I said, handing him a rose. First lesson, hold it like it's precious, but don't be afraid of it. Flowers are stronger than they look. He took the rose carefully, his large hands looking almost comical around the delicate stem. Like this, he asked. Not quite, I said, moving behind him and putting my hands over his. Gentle but firm, support the bloom, but let the stem do most of the work. Feel how it wants to sit. Work with it instead of forcing it. His hands were warm under mine, and I felt him relax into the instruction, letting me guide him. Gentle but firm, he repeated. I can do that. You've been doing it since the night we met, I said softly. The way you protected me without making me feel helpless, the way you held me when we danced, the way you're holding that rose right now, like it's precious. It is precious, he said, turning to face me, our hands still joined around the stem. Everything you touch is precious. Everything you create is beautiful. You take individual flowers and make them into something greater. You see possibilities where other people just see petals. You're going to make me cry, I said, laughing through tears. Again. You're going to make me cry again. Then cry, he said, setting the rose down and pulling me close. Cry and laugh and feel everything. You taught me that. You showed me that it's okay to feel, to hope, to imagine a future that isn't just about revenge or duty. What kind of future do you imagine? I asked, my face pressed against his chest, his heartbeat steady under my ear. One where I pick you up after work and we argue about where to have dinner, he said. One where you teach me about flowers and I teach you about wine, where we go to galleries and farmers markets and do absolutely normal, boring things that feel extraordinary because we're doing them together. One where maybe someday you'll let me buy you a ring and make this permanent, where we build something real and lasting. That sounds perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. We worked on the arrangement together, him following my instructions with careful attention, and I found myself laughing at his serious concentration, at the way he approached flower arranging like it was a complex business negotiation requiring strategy and precision. "You're terrible at this," I said, as he tried for the third time to get a peony to sit at the right angle. "I know," he said, but he was smiling. "But I'm enjoying it. I like learning something new, like seeing the world through your eyes. You just like spending time with me," I teased. "That too," he admitted. "I've missed you, Maya. Missed your voice and your laugh and the way you explain things. Missed feeling like I was part of something good instead of just managing damage and making hard choices." "You were always part of something good," I said. "You protected people. You took care of your organization. You hunted your sister's killer. Those aren't bad things." "They weren't enough," he said. "They didn't make me happy. They didn't make me feel alive the way you do, the way this does, standing in a flower shop on Valentine's Day, learning to arrange roses with the woman I love." He kissed me then, deep and sweet, his hands tangling in my hair, and I tasted hope and promise and a future I'd stopped believing in. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling, breathless, surrounded by flowers and the golden light of late afternoon. "Stay," I said. "Tonight, tomorrow, as long as you want. Stay and help me with orders and tell me about your new business, and let's figure out what normal looks like for us." "I'll stay," he said. "For tonight and tomorrow and every day you'll have me, I'll stay and we'll build something beautiful together." We finished the wedding arrangement working side by side, our hands brushing as we placed stems and adjusted blooms, and when it was done it was perfect, better than anything I could have created alone. "See," I said, "you're not terrible at this, you just needed practice and patience." "Like everything worth doing," he said. "Like us." "Like us," I agreed. The sun was setting now, painting the shop in shades of pink and gold, and I looked at Dante standing among my flowers, this dangerous man who'd chosen mercy, who'd changed his life, who'd come back for me, and I felt something settle in my chest, a rightness I'd been missing. "1 year ago, I knocked on the wrong door," I said. "Changed both our lives," he said. "Best mistake I ever made," I said. "Not a mistake," he corrected. "Fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it, you were supposed to knock on that door, supposed to stumble into my life and turn everything upside down, supposed to show me there was more to living than just surviving." "The wrong door was exactly the right one," I said. "Exactly," he agreed. "And these roses, pulling me toward the bouquet he'd sent, the Juliet roses that had once been symbols of obsession and death, they're not weapons anymore, not threats, they're promises, they're hope, they're us." He pulled one from the vase and tucked it behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my cheek. "I love you, Maya Chen," he said. "My accidental delivery, my unexpected salvation, my future." "I love you too." "Dante Moretti," I said. "My wrong address, my right choice, my home." We locked up the shop together as full dark fell, his hand in mine, the Juliet roses sitting on the counter waiting to be taken to the safe house that had become our shared space, and I thought about my mother's belief that flowers had language, that they could express what words couldn't. She would have liked him, I realized, would have approved of this man who'd learned to see beauty in blooms, who'd chosen growth over destruction, who looked at me like I was more precious than all the rare roses in the world. "Where to?" he asked, as we stood on the sidewalk outside Bloom and Thorn, the city moving around us, normal life continuing oblivious to the fact that everything had changed. "Home," I said. "Let's go home." And as we walked toward his car, his arm around my waist and my head on his shoulder, I thought about wrong deliveries and right choices, about roses that meant obsession transforming into roses that meant love, about two broken people finding healing in each other. Valentine's Day had brought death a year ago, had stolen Lucia and set Dante on a path of vengeance, but this Valentine's Day brought life, brought hope, brought the promise of new beginnings. Sometimes the wrong address was exactly where you needed to be. Sometimes getting lost was how you found your way home, And sometimes love bloomed in the most unexpected places, beautiful and true and absolutely worth fighting for. We had work ahead of us, trials to testify at, businesses to build, a future to create from the ashes of the past. But standing there with Dante's hand in mine and the scent of roses clinging to my skin, I knew we'd face it together, knew that whatever came next, we'd handle it the way we'd handled everything else, with courage and trust and the kind of love that endured beyond reason, beyond danger, beyond death. The florist had delivered roses to the wrong address, and the Mafia boss had answered the door. And somehow, against all odds and logic, they'd found exactly what they'd been missing, found each other, found home.